Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Don Clemmer. I'm an enterprise sales engineer with Parallels. We're going to be talking about advanced technical training with Parallels Remote Application Server version 17.1, update 1 today. All right, so kind of exciting. A couple of quirky things about the WebEx and the meeting here. First of all, you're not all by yourself. I know it looks like that. Whatever reason, the way it's set up, it looks like you're kind of isolated and it's just you getting a private showing. We have many people here today. It looks like it's kind of you're all by yourself. And with that, I kind of like to make my sessions interactive. And my preferred method actually would be for us to just kind of have an open discussion as we go along. Unfortunately, that doesn't work in the WebEx environment or an environment like this, right? Somebody will have a staticky connection, echoes, background noise, maybe they get busy in another call and they put us on hold, something like that. You listen to hold music. And then, of course, in the work from home environment that we're all in today, we're going to have a lot of noise with dogs barking and children and family like that. I guess we're going to kind of all have to get used to that. But we're all nice and safe in this virtual environment, so that part is good. Okay. So with that kind of stuff, let's talk about out of the way. Let's kind of take a look at the course overview that we have. So we're scheduled to go 4 hours. We'll probably come in just a few minutes under that, kind of depending on the questions. You might get about 5 or 10 minutes back in your day there. We're definitely going to take a couple of breaks. I can't talk that long at once. I'm going to need a couple of breaks. And I know it's going over kind of lunchtime for a lot of us. So we'll definitely be taking a couple of breaks in there. We'll kind of at least get a bite to eat. The format of this is going to be kind of lecture and demo and lecture and demo. We are covering a few more of the complex topics, or I guess there's a little bit more to them in terms of setting some of this up. So some of the demos, to make it go a little bit smoother, I re-recorded or pre-recorded all the action and made kind of a video of them, right? So as we're kind of going through, I'll have pre-recorded that and then I'll just live narrate over it. That way we can, it will have kind of a smoother experience in case I make a mistake, because I actually am going to follow along on some of our documentation during this, just because there's a lot of steps and I don't want to make sure I miss something. So I can kind of speed that up. And I also can speed up the pauses where we sit here and hit enter and then have to wait for status bars to complete, which can take a while, right? Both in cloud environments. Ours usually isn't too bad, brag, but sometimes when you deploy something, obviously it takes a few minutes for the files to copy, to sync up, things like that to come online. And if we waited for all of that to get done live, we'd probably be here a couple of days. So I pre-recorded some of the demos just so we can kind of speed that up, and I can truncate a little bit. I am going to, like I said, live record over them. The other piece to this is there's no actual real labs associated with this, unlike the basic training, but there is kind of a self-study piece, right? Please deploy this and try it out, try all the features out. You've got the ability to activate a free trial, and some of you have NFR keys. Either way, you can create a test environment out and try all this out. Right. You'll have a copy of the recording and the slides. We've got some nice documentation online, knowledge base articles. I'm going to link to all of that. So you'll be able to see that and just go along and practice the steps out so you can kind of get that done. Additionally, as I said, a recording of today's session will be made available to you. So you'll have that. And a copy of the slides also would be available. So you'll have both of those things, as well as just our normal regular documentation. And then there is a new advanced certification exam. And so we would highly encourage our partners to please take that. The goal kind of is to get you closer to doing that. It will be a little bit more difficult, of course, than the basic one, but you should be able to kind of get through that, doing that exam there. Okay, on a little bit. The prerequisites, this is advanced training, not basic training, so I am expecting a few things out of you in terms of an understanding. First is a functional experience with a remote application server. Hopefully you've completed the basic training and gotten certified on that. More importantly, though, also is you've got a little bit of hands-on experience. You've installed it a few times. So when I start talking about how you do something, I click plus in this to add a new server, or add a new server component. I can do that. You're kind of understanding how we publish applications, filtering, and permissions, RAS policies, HTML5 interface, the client. None of that should be a big surprise to you. I'll circle back to a few things and a few references here or there, but for the most part, I'm assuming that you've kind of already got that. Also, in addition to that, you'd have a working knowledge of the underlying RAS architecture. So if I start talking about publishing agents and gateways and how load balancers and so forth, remote desktop servers, VDI infrastructure, so forth, you're not completely in the dark. You kind of have an understanding of what I'm talking about there. So we are kind of expecting that you've got that. There is a video online. It's part of the training. It's in the partner portal training, and it does go over the basic remote application server infrastructure. I believe it's also up on YouTube as well. If you just search on Parallels RAS YouTube, it'll take you to all our YouTube videos online, but that'll give you that background that you need if you don't have it. And the other piece, a lot of this does expect that you've got a working knowledge of Active Directory and at least some basic understanding of DNS and how that works, even if you're not a DNS administrator. I'm not going too deep into the weeds on either of those two topics, but you should kind of have an understanding of what I'm talking about when I hit some of that and what the documentation talks about, so that you're not just kind of completely lost. You can kind of follow along and say, oh, okay, yeah, I know what he's talking about. I know what he's talking about. You're a little rusty and don't know exactly how to click, 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 and do it like a daily admin would do, but you can at least follow on. So that's kind of what we're expecting for, like I said, the basic skills in terms of a background from you guys. Additionally to that, I always throw this up because I don't want people to forget that this isn't the only documentation and resources we have. If you go online to http://parallels.com/product/RAS/support, it takes you to our online knowledge area. I never remember that. I go to parallels.com, that's easy to remember. And I click on support up in kind of the red banner area. And then I choose the product, which is remote application server. And then that takes you to essentially that page. Other than logging in to contact our support organization, right there also has access to our knowledge base. You can also just go to kb.parallels.com to get to that and then pick your product. There's a lot of articles that describe how to do things in the knowledge base. And I actually will pop a bunch of them up on the screen and reference them as they go through, so you'll be able to see them and find them easily. Although if you search on them, you should be able to find them pretty easily as well. But we do have a lot of knowledge base articles on this and a lot of the topics I'm covering. And then from that page, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll get to our documentation. It's a little blue link. It's not very obvious, but it's there. It says technical documentation and resources. And within that, you'll see the admin guide, our solutions guide, our best practices guide, the client guides, reference architectures, printing best practices, kind of a licensing overview, a whole ton of stuff in there. Case studies, all sorts of things like that. So that's definitely worth kind of looking at and going to when you're trying to work how to do this. And a lot of how-to kind of step-by-step information is built into that. Okay, and with all that, this is kind of what we're going to be covering in terms of a topic. We're starting obviously with the introduction and overview. We're actually kind of a good chunk of the way through that already. But we're going to look at the certificate manager within RAS that's new. Then we're going to get into multi-tenancy and the tenant broker. We're going to talk about using a cloud-based load balancer instead of our HALB, high availability load balancer virtual appliance, because once you're in an environment, you don't want to use our load balancer. It's going to add a lot of cost and complexity to you, and we really don't like either of those. So we want you to highly recommend that you use the Azure and AWS load balancers or the load balancers from another platform. Pretty much almost any load balancer will work, even if you're on-prem. I had somebody talk to me the other day, and they were using an Oracle load balancer. Didn't even know Oracle had a load balancer. I certainly have no idea how to configure an Oracle load balancer, but they did, and they got it to work. So I definitely would like the right platforms using those, and we're going to go through and actually configure and demo both the Azure load balancer and the AWS load balancing services to work with Parallels Remote Application Server. One of the big new features that we have is SAML. That's that single sign-on. You can kind of use that SAML intermediary piece and then tie in a customer's Active Directory services into SAML, and then tie in remote application servers, which we obviously tie into an Active Directory domain as well. We'll tie all that together so you can get out of the business of having to reset users' passwords and manage their accounts specifically. We'll talk about all that, and we'll do a demonstration. We're going to set up SAML soup to nuts with Parallel's remote application server. So that's going to go through. I also want to do a little bit of kind of troubleshooting and log details. So I want to introduce you to the Parallels logs, because we do quite a bit of logging, quite a bit of extensive logging, quite frankly, both on the server side, which is where most of them would be, but also on the client side. I want to introduce you to the logs and then go through some troubleshooting examples about how we use those logs, and also introduce you into some other tools that we can use to, or that you can use to kind of maybe prevent problems or resolve problems and things like that. The one I'm not going to mention, or the two I'm not going to mention so much, I guess there's a reporting tool which could be used, but also the monitoring. I'll get into that. That covered that briefly in the basic. That obviously is a tool that you can use. It gives you performance statistics across the entire RAS farm and site. So I'm not going to, I guess the site, is it's set up site by site. I'm not going to get into that or even really talk about that, but you guys should know that's there because you've completed the basic training, right? And then beyond that, there are some additional features that we're going to cover. I kind of put this all into a single section just because they were a little smaller in length in terms of the demo. So just due to length, I didn't break them off into their own category, if you will, but we're definitely going to cover those. So I'm going to start with the Microsoft Azure VDI and RDSH provisioning. We've got the ability now to do auto scaling in Microsoft Azure. So I'm going to talk about that. We're also going to do a demo. You can see that in action and how that would work. And we've introduced one of the big highly anticipated features people have been wanting for a while, which is really cool, is the Google Authenticator. So I'm going to do a quick demo and talk about that. And then two new, they're not even necessarily new. One of them is kind of new, that administrator folders in publishing, and then the ability to do permissions delegations, which just simply means, you know, certain users can, you know, there's the session management piece that we can do, where you can grant access to like help desk or power users to do some basic session management, like send messages out or, you know, maybe log off stuck sessions, things like that. You've actually got the ability to do groups like the finance department, and I'm kind of the go-to techie guy there. I could actually have my IT staff grant me permission to just do that for the accounting department and not screw up with other departments in case like mischievous. So that actually is, both of those are functionalities that's in RAS. It's been around for a while, but I don't know that too many people know about them. So I'm going to mention them here, and I'm also going to do a demonstration and go through that and a few other things that are related to those in terms of making more of a seamless user experience, and then also kind of get into just very briefly the web console, which is meant for help desk administration. And then to wrap up, there's actually a handful of other features that were released in version 17.1 that I'm not going to get into very deeply, but I just want to mention them and introduce you to them so that you're aware that they're there. And then you can go to our documentation and knowledge base if you need to look up a little bit more. And then beyond that, we'll actually do a real wrap up, or I'll kind of wrap up, and then we'll take questions. Again, use the chat window and that QA window. I tend to watch the chat window a little more than the QA window. It's up center and it's kind of popping up on me. I got another screen that kind of has that. The QA window I will get to, but I don't see those just as much. So you can use either one, but the chat window I'll tend to get to a little bit quicker. Please ask your questions as we go through. We can kind of chat on the side as I'm going through this, or I can kind of catch up during the breaks and I'll get those so you don't have to wait all the way to the very end. I'm guaranteed I'll probably miss one or two when they go through there if they scroll by, because like I said, I'm trying to demo and do this at the same time. But we'll try to get them as best we can. And then if there's some at the end that you think of or we didn't get to, I'll leave a little bit of time at the end where we can ask questions there. But it's all going to be kind of chat based. Like I said, I wish I could actually talk, or have you guys talk. That's way more interesting. But unfortunately, just like I said, the audio qualities I talked about earlier will will just, they're not going to be conducive to that. Okay, and we have all these really cool features within Parallel's remote application server that we've introduced. Just a dramatic amount of stuff in the years that I've been here. Big improvement in the product, and yet the one thing that hasn't changed is our licensing model. I always like to kind of reiterate this. There's still just one licensing model, and that is purely by concurrent user. There is no Advanced Enterprise Platinum Plus Data Center Edition or anything like that. So all these features are available to you just out of the box. The exact remote application server product that you've always been using, they're there. The only thing that's not in like the MSI file would be the reporting service, the load balancer, the help, and the monitoring service. Those are included. There's no charge for those, but there's just a they're a different download. They don't just deploy right out of the standard remote app server MSI file. But that's it. Everything's included in there. There's no additional, like I said, features or add-ons for any of this. It's all available to you. And of course, as always, support included, but you can always upgrade too once you're ready. So a lot of cool features in 17.1. We did a few fixes and updated and introduced some features there. So I'm actually going to talk about a couple of features that are specific to version 17.1 update 1 as well. But all that's included. So none of that has changed in the licensing, which is the really good news. All right, last little bit of housekeeping before we move on. You know, there is the Parallels Partner Portal, Parallels RAS partnerprm.com. That link there, I don't go into it very often because I don't administrate it, but I do log in once in a while to take a check. But once you log in, you can go ahead and get certified. Click on that link. That may be how many of you found this training if you didn't have an invitation that was set out. Also in the partner portal, if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll find some information there about how to take the exam. And again, please do take the exam. That will also happen in the follow-up link. We all occasionally do have people signing up to take our training that are not partners and they don't have access to the partner portal and they want to take the exam. Well, it's not really an industry exam. It's just a certification exam to make sure that our partners understand the product when we're going out there and talking to our joint customers. But you're very welcome, of course, to take the training. We don't charge extra for this. The payment is you get to listen to me for a little bit, right? And I think with that, we're good. So let's get rolling, and we'll start with one of my favorite new features in RAS, which is the new certificate manager in version 17.1. You know, traditionally within RAS, if you're going to manage the SSL certs, it was done on a per basis. You have to go to each gateway individually to see what the certificate situation was like there. What we've done in version 17.1 that is really, really cool is we now have a central dashboard. So all the certificates are listed in one place and you can look at it. Okay? And you can manage this either at the site level or the tenant broker level. The other thing that was really cool is we've added the default settings, site default settings for the gateways. You've seen this in other places within the interface, I'm sure, but for gateways now, I can manage all the gateways as a whole just by changing the default settings, right? So I've taken a picture of this so that we can see what it can look like. Right, it's just under farm, and then there's the certificates, and then the nice thing, the reason I took this picture is we actually have a couple that are going to expire. So it will actually tell us the certificate status, if it's good, if it's going to expire, hey, warning, warning, right, or if it actually is expired, and then whether it's self-signed or imported. An imported certificate usually should be one from proper certificate authority. The certificate usage section, that'll also specify what's available for the RAS gateways or the HALB or both, because you actually can assign certificates to either of those entities, right? So you kind of make it pick and choose. And then the rest of the interface is going to be very familiar, right? There's an action button up in the top right, which is the plus that lets us import, generate a new cert request, generate a new self-signed request, etc. And then all the certificate management actions are captured and can be viewed later under the settings audit section. So, like I said, if we take a little closer look at the gateway piece, I wanted to show you just the site defaults, right? So here we are under the familiar farm and gateways. But when I go into the properties of one of the gateways, you'll see that inherit default settings and the site defaults that we use elsewhere in the interface. This is really, really cool feature because now if I click on site defaults, I can change the settings for all the gateways at once. So I don't have to go gateway by gateway by gateway by gateway. You know, if you have a larger environment, you'll have a lot of gateways. I don't have to do that once. However, that nice little checkbox over there for inherit default settings, what that does is obviously it lets us say this particular gateway is not going to use the default site settings within RAS. It's going to have its own settings. So you still have the flexibility of having some gateways that kind of do their own thing, their own configuration, if that's a use case for you. But you still would have the option now to manage most kind of en masse without having to go gateway by gateway by gateway. This is, like I said, a really kind of cool feature. I love the centralization of this. I've been wanting this for years, actually. And the other thing to kind of look at is if we go into the gateway properties, you'll see, and this is whether I'm using the default settings or the site defaults, it's the same. It's just a matter of where I'm changing it. But I actually can go in and see all the certificates that are imported within RAS and pick the one that I want to use. So if all your gateways are using the same one, so it's a wildcard cert or whatever, I can do that. I also can pick and choose different certs for different gateways, provided that the certificate was configured to match the resource, right? That it's set to a gateway or help. I'll show you where that is in just a second when we go through it. The other checkbox that's new in here, actually it's not a checkbox, it's a new setting, the configure setting up there is HSTS. HTTP strict transport security. So a gateway normally accepts both HTTP and HTTPS traffic. Right, that's dependent, of course, on whether your firewall allows that through. But if you want an extra layer of security, you can turn this on, HSTS on, and it forces the web browser only via HTTPS. So a nice little security setting there. Right, and the rest of the settings here are ones that are very familiar, right? I can set the SSL version, the cipher strength, the port configuration, you know, just as I always have in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and actually jump over to the product itself and we'll do a quick demo. Okay, so I've logged into our Azure environment here. I just opened up, I published the console as an application and went to a web browser and then just launched it in the HTML5 interface. But if I go to Farm and then Certificates, here's the dashboard that you'll see. And the reason I took a picture of that earlier was we've recently replaced all our certificates and none of these are going to expire anytime soon, right? They're all green and have quite a ways to go. If I kind of look at them real quick, I can see, first of all, who modified them, and you can see most of them were System and then Victor. I've got the two self-signs that are in there. I could delete them if I wanted to and clean them up. We just left them in for a demo environment. And then you also can see whether it's self-signed or imported very easily. And then I can go over and also see if it's been assigned to the gateway or the load balancer or just the gateway. This is where you can see that usage. I'll show you how that comes into play in just a minute. Okay. If I go into a right click and then go to properties on the certificate, I can view all sorts of information about the certificate, right? The name, if I added a description. Here you can see under the, I can see the key size and the expiration dates and the common name and all that. And I also can see whether it was assigned to a gateway or a load balancer. And I could modify that setting here. Obviously, your certificate would have to match whatever it is you're doing there, but I could pick and choose and change it later if I had to. The other things I can do actually is go down here and click on the View Certificate Info. This gives me information all about the certificate, you know, the IPs, the identities. It tells me that it was issued to, issued by, and even the valid from dates. And then there's this issuer statement. If I click on that, that actually opens up a web page here, as you see, and it takes me to the certificate authority that I purchased it from, and it can see some of the information that they have. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click OK, and then I'll cancel out of this. All right, the other thing is very familiar. If I go up and click on the little blue plus, you'll see that I can import a certificate, generate a self-signed certificate, or generate a certificate request, just like I always could. And if I click on just an import a certificate, you'll notice that I can here check if I've got or both, whether it's for one or the other. And where that comes into play is if I move from farm and then go over to gateways, and then I'll go into the properties of one of the gateways here, and then to the SSL tab, I can select, as I said, the certificates. So all matching usage, the default, or I could actually just pick the certificate that I want to use. And this might be, again, a good reason to clean it up a little bit so you don't see too many. But this would only be available, certificates here would only be available if they had the that gateway box that was checked for this. Okay. And then here's the HSTS configuration. You know, essentially you can turn it on and then set the max age and include subdomains and preload. There's a lot of good information about it in the admin guide that kind of gets down into the weeds about what's required for this. So you might want to think about it before you get into that piece, or at least take a deeper look at it. Okay. This, like I said, is running in Azure. I showed it to us because it did have actually proper certificates in it, but also because it's running on Azure, there's no load balancer. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to my lab environment here. This is just my lab environment. I go to farm and certificates. Because it's buried so far down inside our network, I've just been running off a self-signed cert. There's no need to really go out and pay for a proper certificate. However, since it is running in my lab and on-prem, I do have a load balancer, which is not available on the other one. So what I wanted to show you here is this is something a lot of people perhaps don't pay attention to, and there's not really a need, I guess, or at least a high demand for it. I haven't come across anybody that's done this, but I wanted to show you this feature. But if I go into the load balance SSL page and click configure, most people that come in here, they just check the port and then check all the gateways. But there is this little drop-down box, pass-through, SSL offloading. What's the difference here? Well, it's just where do you want the SSL cert to process, right? If I click on pass-through, it's going to go right through the load balancer to the gateway, and the gateway will handle processing and offloading the SSL certificate and decrypting that part. If I set it up to SSL offloading, I have to remember to check the gateways again and then go to configure. And then I have the SSL settings here. And again, I could see a list of certificates here, but only if they had that HAL, but the HALB piece checked, right? So just to remember, going back, kind of how our ports work, right? If you don't have SSL offloading turned, if you're just pass through, you're coming into the load balancer over port 443, most likely. You're coming out of the load balancer over port 443 with the SSL certificates and encryption still intact. And then when I hit the gateway, it will handle the decryption there. If I turn on SSL offloading, then it's going to come into the load balancer over port 443, and then it's going to decrypt and strip off that certificate, the SSL cert here, and then pass it on to the gateway over port 80. Okay. So most people just leave this alone. I actually have not yet come across anybody that wanted to use the SSL offloading for the load balancer. It's there for you. Okay, and with that, we're done with the certificate management demo. Okay, so let's talk about multi-tenancy. We've added some very cool multi-tenancy features to version 17.1. And now there's 3 different ways that we can design a multi-tenant architecture within Parallel's remote application server. We can do a logical isolation, we can do a full isolation, and then the new piece for version 17.1 is the tenant broker. If we think about a logical separation, it's a very traditional and easy way to do that, right? It's just a single RAM. Everybody's running in the same Active Directory, but I'm centralizing, managing where end users end up by using organizational units, GPUs, and then RAS filtering policies, okay? So you have very much a shared infrastructure, and then I'm just doing logical isolation. It's very efficient because we're using the shared infrastructure, right? I don't have to build out quite as much infrastructure. with it. I only have to open up one port on the external firewall, and I can have either my users log into just a single common URL or web page, if you will, that is yours, right? I'm a service provider, you're logging into my environment, or if I'd like, I can actually give them all a different look and feel just by giving them a slightly different URL, right? You log into this /URL, you log into that URL with this tag, and you get a completely different look and feel, so it feels like they're logging into their own environment. You still just have the one address, public IP address, that's open on that, right? And then the Active Directory, as I mentioned, it would have to be a shared Active Directory, or if you got different Active Directories going on, or domains, I guess would be the better way to put that, there has to be a trusted relationship between them. Very simple, great for certain environments, provided that you can share infrastructure in terms of what you're doing. If this doesn't work, because you do have limited physical isolation here, you actually can take the next step, which is in the complete opposite direction, and go with full isolation. So in this case, I've got separate farms per tenant, and I also have separate Active Directory infrastructure per tenant, and I have separate IPs per tenant that they're logging into. So I have no bleed over whatsoever. There's absolutely no communication between the farms. I have no shared infrastructure. I have a unique public IP and a unique address per tenant. So I have 3 openings, if you will, in this example, right? Each tenant has their own way into the farm. The good news is that there's no additional Parallels licensing cost involved with this, right? Because we license purely by concurrent user. So it doesn't matter if you have 1 farm or 10 farms or 20 farms. Good and powerful way to do things, if you will, just completely isolating the infrastructure. You don't have to worry about bleed over whatsoever. What we've introduced in version 17.1, however, is the concept of tenant broker. And if you look at it, it looks very similar to the other environments, right? I've got a shared infrastructure in that middle tier, the connection tier, the connection layer, if you will. I've got my load balancers, I've got the RAS gateways out there, and I even have some publishing agents out there. But all that does is simply operate inside of the tenant broker. When I get to the actual production systems, if you will, where the end users are doing their work, right? The VDI instance, a terminal server instance, even a remote PC, if you were to go that route. Look how those are, right? It's its own Active Directory, and it has no relationship whatsoever with the other tenants. So it is isolated and managed at a physical level at that point. I can even have a firewall that's separating the different tenants so that they can't get out and get through there. Okay, so I've really walled them off. So it's kind of a hybrid approach, right? Up front in the connection layer, and then I've got an isolated resource layer on the back end. And from the public IP perspective, I just have to have that one public IP that's coming in, and then I can either use a common URL, or I could give everybody, actually you couldn't use a common URL, I'm sorry, I'll show you that in the demo. They would each log into their own URL. It could look the same, but they would each have their own URL, and that's what would send them to the back end into the correct tenants. So you'd have a unique look and feel for each tenant, although you could duplicate it so it looks the same if you'd like, but they would have their own URL to get through there. So it kind of combines both, right? I've got physical and Active Directory isolation. I've got no communication between farms, but I do get to reduce somewhat my physical infrastructure that's required to get in there. So let's take a closer look at this, right? A closer look at exactly how the tenant broker would work. So obviously in the middle there, I've got the tenant broker piece, which has the shared gateways, the load balancer runs at the tenant broker level, right? All that's there. When I look at the tenant itself, I look up at tenant 1 first, I don't actually have to run the gateway and the load balancer at the tenant if I don't want to. There's no need, right? All that work there is happening up at the tenant broker layer. So I don't have to run it there if I don't want to. In fact, in many cases, I think most people probably wouldn't run it there, right? That's part of the reducing infrastructure and sharing the infrastructure piece and getting some of the cost savings there. But if we look at what I'm doing with tenant 2 here, I can run a separate gateway and load balancer infrastructure down there if I want to, right? Maybe I've got internal users, right? I've got an environment that's kind of on site. People do come to the office some and they want to connect through that way traditionally, but when they're outside or I'm coming through my common shared infrastructure externally, so that'll work. The other thing where you might use this as a use case is, let's say you've already got farms already in play in production, and you want to migrate towards using the tenant broker. Have them keep connecting to the old way, right, until you get the new infrastructure in place. And then once you got everybody fully trained and comfortable logging into the old one, then you can shut off the external IP and then start turning off the connection layer infrastructure in the tenant. So you can run them both simultaneously. It's possible to connect through a local connection layer infrastructure as well as the tenant broker layer infrastructure simultaneously. That lets you do kind of a staged migration, if you will, or staged implementation. Okay. And this is more of an engineering document I pulled out of one of our knowledge base articles. You can kind of get an idea when we look at this about what components beyond just the traditional or the standard gateway load balancer, publishing agent, VDI, RDSH runs, right? You can see what runs actually where. So if we take a little closer look at this, or at least call some of it out in the way it works, every tenant must have a unique public domain address. That's where I kind of misspoke earlier, right? When I said they could use the same URL, they can't. So I could simply say, you know, like tenant1.msp.com, tenant2.msp.com, and so forth, but it would map to just the single IP address that you've exposed publicly. But that different address, and I'll show you how to configure that when we do the demonstration, that different address is what actually directs them to whether they're going to tenant 1, tenant 2, or whatever. So they use a different URL that will send them to the appropriate farm. If they type in the wrong URL, well, they're still not, you know, you're still not in trouble because they don't have credentials to get into that environment, right? They would have nothing, no Active Directory or anything to get into that. So they'd be locked out, okay, if they go to the wrong one. The web themes are defined at the tenant level. Okay, so when you do that look and feel, you're actually be logging into the tenant level and going into themes and changing that. That's a little bit separate, right? We've split the tenant themes or the themes off a little bit from the gateway under the covers. You don't really notice this so much when you're doing the configuration, but remember that the HTML5 gateway and that web interface exists at the tenant broker level here, but the themes are still defined at the tenant level, not at the tenant broker level. Okay, SSL certs, they're going to be defined generally at the tenant broker level. Why do I say generally? Well, it's possible that you could run a gateway infrastructure inside each tenant as well as the tenant broker, in which case, if it is public facing, you're going to want to have certs there. But typically, if you don't have gateways inside each tenant, you can manage the certs all just at the tenant broker level, the connection layer level. You don't have to go in there and manage them for each individual tenant farm if you don't want to. You don't have to, right? Especially if you don't have gateways, I guess you can't at all. Two-factor authentication settings are defined at the farm level, right? The tenant farm level, not in the connection layer level, but the tenant broker. So let's talk about that, benefits that gives us. I can now have a single infrastructure where end users come into, but tenant 1 perhaps uses the Google Authenticator. Tenant 2 may use Azure MFA. Right? Tenant 3 might use Duo and so forth, right? I can have a different two-factor authentication system for each one of my clients. I can even have tenant 4 that has no 2FA. They don't want to pay you for it, so they don't get it. Well, we don't need it, right? They could do something like that. So you define the 2FA settings at the tenant farm level. Okay. From a licensing standpoint, from a big picture standpoint, there's no change to the licensing rate. We don't license per feature, it's just purely concurrent user. So this doesn't cost you anything extra. But the tenant broker has nothing whatsoever. You can install the tenant broker and they don't ask you for a license key. So you don't need to plug in a key up into that part of it. You can just install it and run with it. The production pieces, right, the actual farm themselves, those do have licenses. That's where you would put your license key or your SPLOC key or whatever at that level. But no key needs to go into the tenant broker level. Okay. The tenants can be separate RAS farms, so they could be completely independent and have nothing to do with each other. You also could have them be separate RAS sites if you get into the site infrastructure, if you remember about that, right? So they can be separate sites as well. Let's see what else. Oh, Parallels clients, right? The clients are going to have to be version 17.1 or greater And that would mean that WISE is not supported through the tenant broker. It's just the type of client can't handle it. So if you use the DHCP configuration settings for WISE, it's not supported through the tenant broker. You can still use WISE, of course. We're not decommissioning WISE by any stretch of the imagination. But WISE would have to have connect to the farm directly. You'd have to have gateway components inside the RAS tenant farm itself and then have the WISE clients connect to that. They would not be able to function and work through the tenant broker. It's just it's not capable of the WISE infrastructure where it is now. But the clients in general have to be version 17.1 or later. So if you're running on an older version of the client, they're going to have to upgrade them in order to be able to use the tenant broker piece. And then the last piece to talk about, of course, is the RAS farms. All the tenant farms are going to have 17.1 or later. Obviously, there's no tenant broker available in an earlier version of RAS, but the tenant farms, you have to get them up to version 17.1 before they can recognize and interact with the tenant broker. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a demo. I'm going to install the tenant broker, and then we're going to connect to a couple of tenants and show you how the whole process works. So to install the tenant broker, I'm just going to run the RAS installer. It's just the regular RAS installer that we download and install all the time, right? And just go next, always accept the license agreement, take the defaults here. This is the new option, right? All I have to do is select RAS tenant broker and then kind of let it go. Firewall rules, I don't need to install the single sign-on. That is, again, for the administrator console. It has nothing to do with single sign-on for the end users. I'm not going to bother with it for this. I'll just go ahead and run install. So literally, other than selecting the tenant broker, I just took the defaults. Okay, I sped that up for us a little bit. So I'll then launch the RAS admin console. Okay, once that's complete, I can just go ahead and log into the tenant broker, right? Similar like we would always do. I can put in localhost. I'm creating the first administrator user. I'm going to let it remember my credentials so I don't have to keep typing them in all the time. Notice I'm not specifying a domain here. This is installing on a standalone server. It's not joined to any of the domains that I have. So I'm going to go ahead and click connect, and we're going to go ahead and log in. And here's the tenant broker. You can see everything looks pretty green and good. I've got a little bit of high CPU or RAM usage, but that's all right. It'll settle down. But it's really just a RAS farm, the same tools and format that we all know and love, but it's missing a few things, right? It doesn't have the RD session host or VDI or the publishing information or policies or anything like that, because it's not doing any of that. It's just providing the shared infrastructure of the gateways and the HALB, if we wanted to add that, and the publishing agent. So just like a regular RAS farm, I could add a second publishing agent, I could configure a HALB, I could do gateways, any of that to create as much redundancy as I want. The one thing that is a little bit different is up here in the tenants, right? I can go, this is where I actually would add the tenants in. Now, before I do this, I want to show you what I've got set up in DNS. So let me minimize this, and I'll open up a command prompt. I've taken down all my Windows firewalls so we can ping and see what's going on. But this particular server is called, there it is, cert-tb. I'm going to ping it using IPv4 so we can. So I'll go ahead and just ping itself, and it's replying from a .44 address, right? I've also defined two other DNS entries in my DNS server, one of which is called cert-s1.praslab.local, and when I ping that, notice it's also pinging to .44. That's what one is going to use when they log in, and then the other one I've done is cleverly named cert-s2.praslab.local, and that also pings the .44. Why does this matter? Well, I'm pinging really the gateway piece of this. It has nothing else to do with any of the other pieces of the RAS server, but it's the gateway server because I'm running in my lab. But this is what you'd need to do to set up a multi-tenant architecture if you were having real customers in production coming in over the internet. Except you wouldn't be pinging a 10 dot address, right? You would be, we wouldn't be pinging anything probably, but you'd be resolving that address to your external address, right? So the tenant one, remember, would resolve to the external address, the external IP. The tenant 2 URL would also resolve to the external IP. And then, of course, that external IP would map to a RAS component, such as the virtual IP address of the load balancer, or if you're a very small environment, or just test gateway like I'm doing here. But that's really all I'm doing is setting that up, because you'll see this cert-s1.praslab.local and cert.s2.praslab.local when I configure the tenants. So let me break out of this. I'm going to go back into my tenant broker console again, and I'm going to go to farm and tenants, and then here's a little blue plus, and I'm going to add the tenants. So we'll start with tenant 1, and then from the public domain address, this is that address that they're actually going to connect to. So this one would be -s1.praslab.local, okay? And that's it. And then to make the connection, we have an invitation hash, right, that you would use. If I'd gone into administration and configured the mail server, I could have mailed it to myself or to an address wherever the tenant itself lies. But since I'm just in the lab and can just RDP into different servers, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, right? And then I'll click OK. And then it tells me that the tenant's not joined, so I can click apply. But I will then move over to my RAS farm that I'm going to join. So this is a RAS farm that's already up and running, right? And if you look at it, I can go to the site information here so we can look at the dashboard. It's already fully functional. It's got a HALB, it's got gateways and all that, but I want to retire this infrastructure here and move people to the tenant infrastructure. So that's easy to do. So I'm controlling this server or this farm under farm site, and I just go to tasks, and then I click join the tenant broker, and then I paste that hash in. Right? When I do that, part of the hash also includes the tenant broker address, so it knows where to go to talk to. And I click join. Hey, it worked, right? I click OK, and then apply is already done. And now I just have to wait. As you can see, it's synchronizing. And this should come back in just very quick if I just refresh a little bit. And that'll sync up. And if I go back to the tenant broker side, you can see it starts at not verified, and then it'll sync itself up in just a moment. There we go. Now it's okay. I go back over here and I refresh, and that's okay too. So now it's working. So I could just connect, open up a web browser and connect to cert-s1.praslab.local, and it would send it right all the way through. But let's go ahead and do another tenant, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and create another one. And what I'm going to create is, let's go back to this farm. I actually created 2 sites in the same farm just to keep it simple, so I could show you this from a single pane of glass. They don't have to be related to each other, remember? They could be 2 completely separate farms on different Active Directory infrastructure. But just to keep life easy, I'm going to switch and manage the second site. Remember, that's how sites work. I manage one and then the other. And this one's really kind of getting pounded, but that's okay. So how do I differentiate these from a little bit? Well, I changed the theme. The other one is all of the default theme. I left it with the red logo that we all are used to when we first see. Here, I went ahead and switched the colors on the theme to blue. So when you see blue, you notice we're connecting to this one, and when you see red, you're connecting to the other one, okay? So this is the one I'm going to add and connect to. So let's go back to the tenant broker, and I'm going to add this one in. So I'm under tenants and farm. I'll click the blue plus. This one I will cleverly name tenant 2. And the public domain address for this one is cert-s2.praslab.local. And I'll grab this hash here, right? And I'll go over here, and I'm going to go to tasks and say join the tenant broker, and I'll plug in the hash, and I'll go ahead and click OK, or join rather. And then when I get back is, uh-oh, yeah, I did that on purpose. Right, so you get this error here, and you're wondering what the heck's going on. The tenant is expired or something. That's not what's happening, right? If I go back over here, I forgot to click OK. That happened to me once, and so I got that weird error, and I thought I would just kind of show it to you guys as a troubleshooting step. Once you copy this, go ahead and click OK and close it. You might even want to click apply, right? Then I can go back over here and go to join. And this time when I plug in that little hash and click join, it works like a champ, right? So just don't forget to click OK on the other side. All right, and this will take a minute or 2 to sync up as well. Like I said, there we go, even though I'm having CPU issues on this particular server. Okay, so that's all done, and we're ready for it to roll. So let's go back over, open up a web browser, And I thought I had Chrome installed. All right, we'll just use IE. IE should work just fine. Yeah, I turned off the enhanced security, so we're good. So from here, I can literally just type in https://cert-s1.praslab.local, and I don't need that cert tab. And then I'll go ahead and click continue. And here we go. It went ahead and connected right to the broker. So, and you can tell this is tenant one, and this is change the theme a little bit, and then it's got the red. So then I go to the other one, and I'll open up a new tab and type in https:// and I'll call this one cert-s2.praslab.local, and enter, and then here we go. And this one is blue, and it says tenant 2. So that's really it, right? That's all you have to do. The main thing is just don't forget to adjust that URL, because the URL, your different customers type, is what's going to send them into it. One other little thing I forgot to mention back on my second site, you'll notice this one doesn't have a gateway or load balancer to it, right? So just like I showed you my diagram, this is brand new. I configured it specifically for use with the tenant broker, and so I didn't put those in there because I don't need them. The only way to get to this site is to go through the tenant broker itself. And yet the theme settings are right here, and this is where I can adjust the themes. So even though the gateways aren't here, I can still play with and adjust the themes. Okay. All right, so that's really it for the tenant broker demo. Okay, so let's talk about load balancing on Azure and AWS with Parallels Remote Application Server. We all know that Parallels ships with its own load balancer, the HALB, right? The High Availability Virtual Appliance, the HALB that ships with the product. It's great if you've got an on-premise solution up to about 2,000 users. It's not a good option, though, for cloud-based environments. And the reason for that is simply that adding a virtual appliance to a cloud-based solution adds a lot of cost and complexity from the cloud provider. It's much better to use the native cloud-based load balancing instead if you're running on a cloud platform. And it's really easy to do, from a very high conceptual level. You're simply lifting out our HALB, our load balancer, and replacing it with the load balancer on the cloud provider, Azure or AWS in this examples, right? So I'm going to demonstrate both how to do Azure and AWS load balancer configuration in just a moment, but I want to spend a little time thinking about gateways in general. It kind of helps us get the big we're really trying to do. First, let's go back to the basics and think about ports, right? The load balancer, we're going to be bringing port 80 or port 443 into the load balancer and out of the load balancer. Most likely, if this is internet facing, it's going to be just 443, right? Port 80 is for unencrypted traffic. And of course, you can change the ports if you want to. You just have to remember to change them on the RAS gateway components, and the fact that the clients will, the Parallels clients will also be defaulting to 443, so you'd have to specify something else. Okay, so 80 or 443 in and out of the load balancer, usually 443. We have port 80 or 443 going into the gateway component itself, right? So you've got to have the ability to pass traffic in both directions through the load balancer like that. But coming out of the gateway servers, that's where we use the RDP port 3389. That's the only place that we make the connection on that port to a remote desktop server, a virtual desktop, or a remote PC, or whatever is using that. So that's the only time that that port needs to be exposed. You can change it if you want, although I haven't had anybody actually do that yet. But that's the only place, buried way, way down in your environment and nowhere near internet facing for that. Another piece that some people don't necessarily think about is that the gateway virtual machines do not have to be joined to Active Directory. They don't have to be. They can be. It's a heck of a lot easier to manage them when they are, right? Because you don't have to deal with permissions and so forth. But they don't have to be if you're worried about security. They also don't need direct access to the internet, right? Even in our environment, we prefer that the direct access to the internet goes to the load balancers, virtual appliance lockdown system, a smaller attack surface, if you will. Same thing in the cloud environment, right? I'd rather have the load balancer for the cloud actually interface with the internet and then not have the gateway systems do it. Right? You can if you have to in your very small environment, but best practice would be don't do that. The other thing too that I want to kind of revisit that can trip people up sometimes is the gateway redirection features. Right? There's two redirections within the gateway that can make life easier for the end users. The first one is we'll redirect HTTP to HTTPS, right? Essentially redirecting port 80 traffic to port 443 traffic. It's really nice if a user forgets to type in the S and they just type in HTTP, we'll automatically fill that in for them. However, think about that. That redirection is happening at the gateway component, which, as I said, is probably not interfacing to the internet. They're behind the a little bit. So for that to work, an end user would have to get all the way to the gateway over port 80 before we translate that over to port 443. Okay? And obviously these are web redirections that I'm talking about, not using the client, but using the HTML5 interface, just to be clear on that one. I have had some customers that do that. They're pretty security savvy and they kind of know what they're doing. Personally, I'll kind of leave that up to you whether you want to do it or not. But if you do want that redirection to be available, you do have to have port 80 open all the way to the gateway because that's where it happens, at least from within RAS. You may be able to have your own tools that do the redirection yourself, but within Parallels Remote Application Server, that's where it occurs. The second one also is very handy, the second redirect that we use. An end user has the ability to type in, let's say, https:// and then the address. Typically on site, it would be the host name or the virtual IP address of the load balancer. Just type that in. And then RAS will go ahead and redirect them to the HTML5 web page, right? So we'll go ahead and append the piece that kind of gets them there automatically. It's very handy, particularly for an on-prem environment. It works great off-prem as well, in the cloud and over the internet. But if you're not aware of what's going on and how that mechanism works, this is where it can trip you up. So let's take a little closer look at what's going on there. You can see these settings down within the RAS Administrator console under Farm, and then Gateways, and then Properties of the Gateway, and then there's a Web tab. It used to say Web Request, now it just says the Web tab. Okay. In here we notice that the default address for the HTML5 interface actually is https:// the server name /RAS HTML5 gateway. You got to have the whole thing in there in order to get to the HTML5 web page. Okay. And the redirect, as I talked about, simply means that you could type in https:// the server name or the address name, and it will append the RAS HTML5 gateway to it automatically. So the users can type in kind of the shorter URL, and it'll URL which gets them to the web page. So kind of nifty, but it can have a problem if you think about coming in over the internet and you leave it at the defaults, right? You've got an external address that you've got natted, right, to an internal address that ultimately gets to RAS and the gateway servers, right? So if a user types in that short name, https:// external address, and hits enter, they're going to get redirected. It's going to hit the gateway and redirect. But look what it's going to redirect them to. https:// server name /RAS HTML5 gateway, the default. If you look at my server name is just what I named the Windows server, Praz01. That's the default. Well, guess what? That Praz01 is not valid on the internet, right? The internet and all the servers out there and the names resolution and DNS and blah, blah, and all that has no idea what Praz01 is. So the users will type in the https:// external address, they'll get redirected, and then they're going to get a page not found because what the heck is Praz01? So to get around that, you need to modify the settings under this web tab here. Or you could just type in the whole thing. So either way will work. You could just tell your users, guess what? Type in the whole string, https:// external address /RAS HTML5 gateway. If you type in the whole thing, it'll work. The other way, and probably really the better way, would be to change the default URL so that it says https:// external address /RAS HTML5 gateway. And you do that right here. Take out the local host name part of the default URL and replace it with your external address. And at that point, it'll work just fine. Okay, So let's go ahead and actually create a load balancer on Azure to use with Parallel's remote application server. There's several steps that we're going to follow to do this. It's all documented in a knowledge base article that you see here. It gives you all the steps that you need to do. By going to the Azure portal itself and creating an availability set. Then we'll create virtual machines within Azure as part of that availability set. And these are going to be our gateways. So we're going to install the RAS gateway component on them. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and create an Azure load balancer. We'll create a backend pool. We'll create a health probe, and then we'll test and evaluate the solution. Okay, so let's go ahead and log into the Azure portal and create an availability set. So I'll get up to my environment up there, click add, and then in the search in the marketplace, I'll type in availability, yep, and choose availability set right here, and then we'll go ahead and click create. Okay. There it is. It's in the right subscription, the right resource groups, and I'll go ahead and give it a name. It will RAS GW, right, for gateways. And my environment is not in Japan. I'm in the West Coast of the United States, so let's put it in US West 2. And let's see, there we go, US West 2. And the rest of these settings I think are fine. So I could just click review and create here. If you want to take a look at the advanced settings, right, we can go ahead and click on those. I'll just go next. I'm not going to change anything, but these are the tags and stuff if you want to take a look at them. And we'll go ahead and, like I said, just click create without changing anything. And I'll speed this up so that we don't have to wait for it. Okay, there we go, all done. Look at that. So let's go to the resource and look, there they are. And now we need to create the virtual machines, right? So we need to create a couple of Windows virtual machines that I can put in the availability set and add the RAS gateway component to. So let's go ahead over here to my environment again, and then I'll click on add. And let's see, there's Windows 2016 Data Center on top. You know what, let's do 2019. Let's go crazy, right? Keep current. So we'll go Windows, Server, 2019, there it is, and hey, Data Center. Yeah, you know what, that's good enough for this. We'll just go ahead with Data Center, why not? So go ahead and click create. And then it's in, again, the right subscription and resource group, so I can just go ahead and give it a name. This is going to be our first gateway server, so I'll call it RAS GW01. There we go. And again, I'm not in Asia. I'm located in the West Coast of the US, so we'll put it up in US West 2. And an availability group, right? That's kind of why we did this. I want an availability set. And let's give it, we already have one. We just created, right, RASGW. Notice, though, I actually could have created it right here. So I could have created it on the fly if I wanted to and save me a step. And let's go ahead and change the size. RAS gateways, 2 processors, 4 gigs of memory. If the gateway is running all by itself, that's plenty. That support about 750 users, maybe a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and log in with Victor's credentials. That way he can handle the billing, right? It's all his. Make sure it's in his billing group. You're welcome, Victor. Makes my life easier, right? Why not? And let's see, there we go, confirm the password. And then I really don't want these guys coming in over 3389. That'd be a big no-no. Let's just keep this internet facing encrypted, so only, right? So I'll get rid of the 3389 there. And then the rest of it's fine. I'll just go next. That's fine. I'll just leave it at that. And let's see. There's my public IP. You know what? I'm going to leave the public IP here. It just makes it a little bit easier for managing. You can go ahead and do this if you'd like this. You probably want to take that away at the end, so don't forget to do that. You don't need a public IP for the gateways. The load balancer will handle that, right? But I'll just leave it there for now. I'll just go to next and we'll review and create. There we go. Okay, so that's the first one going. Let's go ahead and create the second virtual machine. So I'll just do the same process as my deployment is underway. All right. So I'll go up here and click add, and then Windows, let's just be consistent, 2019 server. I could mix and match if I want, but why bother with that? So I'll call this one RAS Gateway 02. I'll put it in US West 2. And I'll speed this up a little bit so we can kind of get through here since we've already seen what I've done. But essentially the same settings, 2 processors, 4 gigs of memory. Oops, I actually think I clicked on 8. It doesn't matter for this. Log in with Victor's credentials again. And 443, not 3389. Gateway component, the inbound connections, and create. And I've sped it up, so this will be done very fast for us. There we go. All right, don't have to wait. Okay, so with that, let's move on and we'll go ahead and install the RAS gateway components next. So let's go over to the RAS Administrator console, and I'll go to Farm and Gateways, and then I'll click on our little blue plus up in the top right there. And the first server was RAS GW01. Make sure it resolves so DNS is working, right? We're going to enable the HTML5 interface and the firewall rules, and I'll click Next and install, and I'll let this go, and I'll speed this up so we don't have to wait for this. And it'll be done very fast. Done. And let's go ahead and go through the same process again, RAS GW02. And I'll speed this one up since we're just doing the same thing so we can get it done. Okay, so that's just about done. There we go, done. I'll click on done. We always click apply. All right, and then our little RAS monitor is telling me that, yeah, the services aren't online yet. I'll click refresh a couple of times, and there we go, green, green, all good. Okay, and then with that, we can move back over to the Azure portal. Let me get back into my environment that's up there, right? And there we go. And then let's go ahead and add a load balancer. So I'll click add, start typing load balancer in the marketplace. There it is. And there's a load balancer. Click create. All right. And yep, all that's good. Let's go ahead and give it a name. So we'll call it RAS-LB. There we go. And it's, of course, in US West. Let me get up to that. US West 2. There we go. Okay. Public is where it's facing. The rest of the SKUs are good there. And we definitely want to create, let's go ahead and create a new public IP address name. So we're going to create a public IP address, and we'll create a public IP address name. So I'll just call this RAS dash LB dash, I don't know, IP, right? How boring. There we go. Okay, so that's done. We don't want it to be dynamic. I want it to be static. People are really connecting to this. I don't want it changing all the time. Okay, so static it is. That's the best practice. And then from here, we can go ahead, we're done. So let's go ahead and click review and create. Okay, so that'll create for us. I'll speed it up so it creates fairly quickly. We passed the validation test, and now we're actually creating it. Okay, there we go, underway, and now it's just about done. Okay, so let's take a look at it. We'll go to the resource itself. And from here, now we can create the other things we need to do. So let's start with the backend pools. So from within the load balancer, I can click on backend pools right there. Okay, and then I'll click add. We're going to add a pool. So there's the add button. And then let's call it, we need to give it a name. So let's just call it, let's see, RAS-LB-pool. Okay, that's there. And then the virtual network, these are our gateway systems, right? I don't need to be public facing. That's what the load balancer is for. So I'm just going to put it on the lab net. All right. And then what are we going to associate this backend pool to? Well, we need to point it gateway systems. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose under associated to virtual machine. Right, actually virtual machines. I'll add both of them here. So virtual machine is RAS Gateway 01, and then I'll 12, which is RAS Gateway 02. And I don't want to forget to do the IP address either, right? So I'll choose that one. And 10 dot, notice it's on a 10 dot. It is internal. It does not need to be public facing. So there they are. I actually could have gone and done a virtual machine scale set if I'd set that up. But with just two virtual machines in this little environment, doing a just brute force and add the two virtual machines here is perfect. So I'll go ahead and do that. Click add, and that's rolling along. Okay, I'll speed this up for us, and they're done. So there's the backend pool, and you can see it has both our virtual machines in it, RAS Gateway 01 and 02. So now I'll click on health probes from within the load balancer, and we're going to add a health probe. So I'll go up there and click on add, and let's give it a name, and this will be RAS LB-probe. Okay. Or no, actually, you know what? Let's use TCP443. That way it'll probe over the ports that I want to do, because that's what actually we're going to be testing is that. So the protocol is TCP and the probe is 443, right? The health probe, what I want to do is make sure that it's going to check that both our gateways are up. If one of them's not answering on 443 or one of them's down, there's no point in load balancing people to that. So we'll go ahead and create that. That'll make sure that they're up and it actually functions and sends people to a port that or a gateway that's up. Okay, so let's actually do the load balancing rules. So I clicked on load balancing and I'm adding the rule here. And RAS LB, I'm going to do the same thing, TCP 443, because that's what we're actually load balancing, is that port. IPv4 is fine. There's our public IP address from Azure, and the protocol is TCP, and then the port, we're going to switch that to 443. So incoming connections 443, back end, it's going to come out to 443, right? We're coming in and out over 443. The gateways will handle it from there. Backend pool is set, the health probe is set, and let's change the session persistence to client IP and protocol. Okay, so that's good. I don't really need to change these other things, so I can click on OK, and that'll handle that. All right. Okay, so that's created and done. Sped that up for us. There we go. There's our rule. I'm going back in here because I want to get the public IP address. Okay, because now we're going to test it out. So I'll go ahead and copy that. And let's move over to our load balancer. Now I haven't set up the web redirection yet within Parallels RAS, so I'm going to have to use the full name here, https:// and then the public IP address I put in, and then the RAS HTML5 gateway tag. Let me get through the self-signed certificate. There we go. Working. Look at that. All right. So the load balancer is working, RAS is working. Let's just go ahead and clean up that web redirection. So back to the RAS console under Farm and Gateways. I could either select a gateway, right-click Properties, double-click, or I can go over here to Tasks and then Properties. Okay, and then I'll go to the Web tab. And Site Defaults, great new feature. I can change it for all the gateways at once. I'll replace the hostname part of that tag with the public IP address. Click OK. We always click Apply. That's done, right? That's it, that quick. So let's go back to our web browser. Now what I can do is strip out that RAS HTML5 gateway tag. I don't have to add it when I type it in. I can just do the HTTPS public IP address, and there it works. Voila, success. So we have successfully created an Azure load balancer and integrated it with Parallels Remote Application Server. That's it. Let's switch gears and look at Amazon Web Services and what it takes to get a load balancer running on AWS with RAS. All the steps that we're going to be going through are documented in a knowledge base article that I have listed here. But essentially, we're just going to log into the EC2 dashboard, choose the load balancer type, configure it, then we'll configure routing and register the targets being the RAS gateways, review and create the load balancer, finalize the configuration, and then, of course, test and evaluate. Okay, so let's go ahead and log into the EC2 dashboard and we'll start configuring. So first off, we do have two running instances up here already, and they both have the Parallels RAS gateway component already installed on them. So those are the two pieces that we're actually going to be load balancing. Okay, so let's go back to the dashboard and we'll actually go ahead and create a load balancer. Okay. So we'll go down to load balancers and then we'll go click create load balancer. And the type we're going to pick is a network load balancer because that's what we're doing. We're just load balancing 443 connections. So let's call it RAS certification. And then for, it has to be internet facing, right? Public use. And then TCP UDP, that would be the preferred method. So we can use both protocols. It could also work with TCP, but TCP UDP is better. And then don't forget to change that port, right? 443. So make sure that's the port. And let's put it in the zone that we want. And we're in US East 1B is where the rest of this is. So that's it. So let's go ahead and click next and we'll configure the routing. Right, so the target name, we'll just call it RAS Gateway, GW, TCP UDP. Again, make sure that port is 443. And that's good. It's just TCP for the health checks. We just want to make sure that TCP is running, right? Make sure it's up. And we'll just leave that alone. And then we're going to add our instances to it and register the targets, right? So add to the register. Again, those are the two gateways that we've already configured. We'll go on next and we'll review and then we'll go ahead and create. Okay, so that's it. It was really fast. And then all we need to do is just watch the state up here that's provisioning and it'll switch to active very soon. There we go. It's active. We usually give it a couple of minutes to kind of settle. If you go into it too fast, it's not going to work. But give it a minute. But meantime, let's go ahead and change the load balancer attribute deregistration delay to 0 seconds. So go in here to edit attributes and then just change this delay. article, by the way. So we'll save that. And with that, there it is. It's all good. It's active and it's ready to use. So let me go ahead and grab the public DNS name right here. And then I'll go ahead and copy and paste this into a web browser. But remember, we haven't done the web redirection yet. So I'm going to add the RAS HTML5 gateway tag. There we go. And then when I hit enter, we'll probably hit the self-signed certificate. And there it is. That means that we're actually hitting the RAS server, the gateway server. So good. We'll just plow right through this. And we will see, in fact, that it is up. There we go. Success. Okay. So let's go ahead and adjust the web redirection, right? Like we did before. So go to Farm Gateways, and then we'll go to the properties of the gateway here, and web request, and then I'll change it for everything under site defaults, and then we'll take out that local server address, and we'll add in the public address, and with the tag afterwards, and then once that's done, we can go ahead and click, there we go. Let me finish typing in the HTTPS, don't want to forget that part either. Okay, so now we're good. We'll click OK, OK, and we can go ahead and click Apply, and let's try it out. So now I should just be able to type in the public address without the tag, right? And when I hit Enter, we should all be good. So look at that. I made a typo in the web redirection settings, HTML gateway, not HTML5 gateway. So let's go back and we'll fix that. I'll go back into the properties under the gateways, web. There it is. Under site defaults. Let me just add that little 5 in there. It has to have the full RAS HTML5 gateway to work, as you see. So OK and apply. Now we can go back, and this time I'll just type in HTTPS in the public address without that tag. And there we go. Voila, it works. So that's how you configure an Amazon Web Services load balancer to work with Parallels. And with that, I think we've earned a break. So I'm going to set the timer for 20 minutes, and let's do a break. See you in 20 minutes, folks. Welcome back, everybody. Hope you all had a nice break. Okay, let's move on, and we're going to talk about SAML. This is kind of a big topic, actually. It's one of the bigger features that we have in version 17.1. It's one of those that I definitely pre-recorded, and I'm just going to live narrate over because there's a lot of steps to get through. I always like to start with the diagrams. We kind of get a big picture overview of what's happening. So from a high level, you as service providers want to get out of the business of managing end user accounts, right? Users coming and going at your various customers, changing passwords, et cetera, things like that. You'd like to be out of that business. And the customers themselves, they would like to be able to use their own accounts, right? Maybe their own email address and their own password to log in and have to keep track of the second one to get to the services that you're providing. And that's where SAML comes in. SAML is kind of that full-on integration. It starts with a third-party kind of identity provider provided by Azure, Okta, or SafeNet. It ties in the customer's directory and authentication services to that, the identity providers, and it also provides your configuration in your Active Directory to the identity provider. So it's all neatly tied in together. So why do you still have to have your own Active Directory if SAML and the customer is handling it as well? Well, think what they're logging into. It's a remote desktop server or terminal server if you prefer. It's a Windows server. It requires Active Directory for authentication. You have to have a user for everybody logging in. There's just no way around that. That's how Active Directory works. But the customers don't need to know about that exact user account, right? We're going to do some mapping between that so that the passwords and everything is managed on the customer side. And we do that through an entity that we have in RAS called the enrollment server, which ties into SAML. If we take a little closer look at the enrollment server, like I said, it's just a separate component within RAS. It deploys from the RAS console like other RAS components, right? Go into enrollment servers under farm and click the little blue plus and push it out. It's a little bit different in that it must run on its own server with no other RAS components. Okay, it won't even let you install it on a PA or a gateway or anything like that, like the other RAS components will let you double up. This one won't even let you do that. Also, think about what it's doing, right? It should be a secure, dedicated server similar to a domain controller or certificate authority. And a couple other nice things about it is you can use multiple enrollment servers for high availability, right? So you can just deploy another one. They'll run active, so they're all doing work for you. In case one fails, the others will take over. They do have to share the same registration key, and there's a few other little quirks and things about them, but it's all in the documentation, and you'll see where all that is when we go through and do the demonstration. So let's move on, and we'll go ahead and take a look at the prerequisites before we kind of get into the actual demonstration and setting all this up. The Parallels remote app has all of this information. I pulled a lot of it out of that. There's also a knowledge base article, but I actually like the admin guide a little bit better. It's got a little bit more detail, presents a little bit better, and so forth. But from a prerequisite standpoint, let's first look at your Microsoft Active Directory. This is your Active Directory where the RAS components are installed. As I mentioned, we do have to install or create rather two users, an enrollment agent user and an NLE user. The enrollment agent user is used to enroll certificates to the RAS enrollment server on behalf of the user. And then the NLE user actually will be used to initiate the connection to the RDSH instance or VDI desktop, whatever you're doing. That NLE user is a little interesting, right? It kind of has to have two almost diametrically opposing roles. It needs to be a member of the remote desktop users group so that it can log in on behalf of the user. It uses a virtual smart card to do that. But we also don't want people to hijack this and then kind of use that by itself. And so we also would like to set up a group policy that would deny login through remote desktop services. And we'll do both of these in the demonstration. You're going to have a Microsoft Enterprise Certification Authority running with certain templates, enrollment agent certificate template and the smart card logon certificate template. And obviously you'll have to have a third-party identity provider. We're not going to spend too much time with this, although I'm going to go ahead and leverage the Azure AD when we do the demo. And then your domain controllers, they're going to have some domain controller certificates, and they're going to have to support smart card authentication. What's the deal with the smart cards? Why do I keep bringing that up? Well, that's kind of the magic that we're doing under the covers, right? We're injecting a virtual smart card into Active Directory on behalf of the user, and that's what actually allows the login process to happen, is by using virtual smart cards. All right, so let's go ahead and configure the whole thing soup to nuts. I've already got a RAS farm configured using what I'm going to call my local AD, and then we've got I'm going to use Azure AD as the identity provider. So the first thing is to remember to create those 2 service accounts for RAS inside my local AD, if you will. That's what my RAS farm is joined to. So I'll go ahead and create a new user, and this will be the enrollment agent user. All right, so we'll just call this, I don't know, SSO. Let's see, mouse fixed here, SSO. Maybe I'll do like SSO agent. That's it. So that'll be the enrollment agent user. I'm calling it SSO agent. Let me go ahead and give them a password. Then I'll go ahead and confirm that password. And then this is an account I really don't want that password expiring on me, so I'll do that. All right, that one's done. So let's go ahead and create the other one, and I'll do the NLA user here. All right, so I'll go ahead and just create the user there, and NLA, and just be consistent. I'll call this one, I guess, NLA agent. Okay. I'll go ahead and do the same thing by setting the passwords for them here. Let's hope I don't fat finger the confirm password. Hopefully that'll work. And this is another one too. I really don't want the password expiring or changing on me. It'll take things down. Next, hey, look at that. Good, finished. No fat fingering. Okay, so remember that SSO agent. That's the enrollment agent user. It's the account used to enroll certificates to the RAS enrollment server on behalf of the authenticated user. So what I need to do is go ahead and delegate control for that. So I'll just right click on the user's container and delegate control just to the whole container, just to my little farm here. I could do this at the organizational unit level if I wanted to keep everybody in the OU, but my little lab, I'll just do it right here, just in the whole container. All right, so the name in here, it's SSO agent. Okay, that's in, because that's what I named the enrollment agent. And then I need to following objects. So I want to manage just the user objects, right? So that's kind of what I'm going through here. This is all in the documentation. Like I said, if you follow through, I actually have a knowledge base for this. But I'm going to go down and do just the user objects because that's all I'm being on. And then let's see, I'll check property specific here. I can talk. And then this is the fun part. This is a huge list, and I need to find 2 specific properties that I'm kind of getting down to. It's that read-write alt security entities. All right, so let's see. I know they're in here somewhere. Like a massive list. Has like a search or something, right? There we go. Read alt security identities. I'll do read-write and then finish. Okay. So that part's done for that user. And then what I'm going to do next, let's see, all right, just kind of going through the notes here, is, oh yeah, the NL agent user, right? Remember, this one has to have those kind of 2 diametrically opposing roles. So the first thing I'm going to do is make it a member of the remote desktop users group on my domain. There we go. That way it can, like I said, log in on behalf of my users. It won't actually log in. It's going to do it on behalf of them. It'll inject the smart card, but that's done. And then because I don't want people or somebody to actually be able to log in with this user, I don't want it actually logging in interactively, I'm going to go into group policy here and set group policy to deny logon through remote desktop services. So go ahead and create a GPO. I'll call that one RAS SAML. And then I'll go ahead and link it here and then edit. And let's see, so I'm just looking to see where this one is. Policies, and then it's under, I think it's under Windows settings. Yeah, I can pull this out a little bit so I can see the security settings, local policies, user right assignments, and then here's somewhere I'll see deny access, deny logon through, there it is, deny logon through remote desktop services. So yes, I want to define this. It's kind of a backwards one. Yeah, deny all login, yes. And here's my user, my NLE user. So that's done. All right, so now they've got kind of both roles that are set in place. Okay, so now I'm going to configure the certificate authority templates. So to do that, let me go ahead and launch the MMC, Microsoft Management Console here. All right, and then we'll remove a snap-in. And then what I want to add is the certificate templates, because that's what I'm going to be managing. Okay, so it's good. Let's go into certificate templates, and then I'm going to create the enrollment agent template. So I'll click on enrollment, the enrollment agent there. I want to duplicate this template, actually. That's the way you change it. So I've duplicated it, and then we'll give it a new name and everything. So, all right. So I'll go over to the General tab, and it's copy of enrollment agent. Let me change that name, and it needs to be PRLS enrollment agent. And that'll also fix the template name as well. There we go, enrollment agent. Validity period is 2 weeks, renewal is 6 weeks. Publish it in Active Directory, but don't check that box that says do not automatically enroll. Okay, that looks good. And then the next tab I'm going over is, let me go to the cryptography tab. Yeah, okay. So go to the cryptography tab. Must use one of the following providers. It's determined by, that role. So I'm going to uncheck that one, and then go down to the Microsoft Strong cryptographic provider, and I want to move this all the way to the top. Yeah, so just check that one and make sure it's on the top. Okay, just looking at my notes here. I said there's a lot of stuff, right? And then I'm going to go to the security tab, and then here I'm going to add the enrollment agent user. Remember, we called that one SSO agent. So I'll check names, click OK, and this guy has to have read and enroll permissions here. So I need to allow those too. Right. Yeah, that's it. So I'll go ahead and click OK. There we go. That one's done, and now I need to create the smart card logon certificate template. So back to my list here, and there's smart card logon. Right click, I need to duplicate the template. And then let's go to the General tab, and instead of copy of smart card logon, let's change that to parallels PRLS smart card. And then validity period, smart card logon. There we go. And then the validity period, 1 year, 6 weeks for the renewal. That's good. And that's it. Okay, so we can move over to the cryptography, and then frequent. Use one of these. Request must use one of these following providers. And again. The one I want to use here is the Microsoft Strong cryptographic provider, just like before, and I'll move this all the way up to the top again, just like we did. And in the security tab, I add the SSO agent, the enrollment user. So do that right there. And that one also needs, this time it needs, read and enroll. And then I'll look back at the issuance requirements. The number of authorized signatures is 1. Application policy, and then for any purpose, user certificate request agent. That's what I'd like for that one. Okay. Those settings are good, so I can go ahead and click apply and OK. All right, so now let's go ahead and issue the certificate templates. I could have done it one at a time, but I'm going to do them both. So back into MMC, and then I'll add and remove a snap-in. And this time, I'm going to actually add the certificate authority. So put that on here, and now I've got this tool going, and then I go into the, let everything catch up a minute. I go into this, and then drill down to the certificate templates, and then I'm going to create a new certificate template to issue. and I should be able to pick my two. So I'll start with the PRLS enrollment agent and click OK. That's in there. And then let's go ahead and let's do the other one. So right click in new certificate templates to issue, and I'll go down and get the other one, right? The PRLS smart card log on. So there they are. They're both there. So that's been done. I've issued both of them. I can go ahead and close and get out of this. Okay, so now I want to restart the Active Directory certificate services. So I'll go into Manage and Services from the Server Manager here. And then, let's see, I guess it's what? Oh, Active Directory, so it's probably near the top, right? There we go. Let me expand that out just to make sure I'm getting the right one. Yep, Active Directory, Certificate Services, and I'll go ahead and restart that. Okay, so it's time actually to go over to the RAS console, and we'll set up an enrollment server. I actually have a server all ready to go, as you can see, so I don't have to deploy Windows or anything for it. So just farm enrollment servers, click on the little blue plus, just like we do so many things. Exactly like that. I'll type in the name of the server as ESO1. Yep, I'll go ahead and go next. It's gonna look for an agent, tell me it's not there. That's the timeout, right? Of course, it's not there. I haven't deployed it yet. So there it is. So since it's not there, I'll go ahead and install it, and it'll take a few minutes. I'm actually going to speed this up real quick, so it's just going to zoom right on by for us so we don't have to wait. Okay, there we go. Look at that, done. Okay, so I'll go ahead and click on done. The agent says it's there. I'll go ahead and click on OK, and then we always click apply. Now, this would come back and tell me it's not validated yet because I haven't done the AD integration. So let's go ahead and do that. I'll go to the AD tab, to Certificate Authority. This information is already in here for us. And then I want to add the enrollment agent, right? That's our SSO agent, right? The enrollment agent user. So I'll go ahead and put that one in. And then the NLA user, well, hey, that's the NLA agent user we just created, right? Go figure. So let me look that one up, NLA agent, and there we go. Okay, NLA agent user, and then I'll go ahead and put the password in for that one. And if I click on validate, I get this error message. It's just a normal informational message. It takes a minute. I got to click apply first, of course, right? And then it takes a minute for this to sync up. So there's that invalid I was talking about. I just refresh it and it should come back and it's okay. And now if I go back into the AD integration and click on validate, right? We're all good. Perfect. Okay, so now let's go back to Active Directory. This is again my local AD, if you will, not the Azure AD. And I'm going to go to that GPO that I created earlier, RAS SAML, that would deny log on to the NLA agent user. And what I want to do is I'm just going to go ahead and add the, let me select computers here, make sure it's looking at the right object. I'm going to add my remote application server. I just have one in my farm demo here. Add that to this. I could actually do this all through an organizational unit and link it that way, but for here, I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to make sure that's enforced so that that's taking effect. Okay, so let's go back to the RAS console. I'm going to configure the integration with our identity provider, which is Azure. So connections, SAML, hit the little blue plus. We go ahead and give it a name. I'll just call it RAS SAML. Remember, SAML uses HTML5 only, so I can pick a theme that I want this to apply to. I'll just use the default theme because that's all I have in the lab, but I could pick any theme that I created. And now I need to copy the address over here. So let me go back over to Azure AD, and actually we need to create SAML. So I'll go into Active Directory on Azure. This is the Azure side, of course. And I'm going to create a new enterprise application. We've got a bunch of them running already in our environment, but I'm going to create a new application, and it's a non-gallery app. And the name I'll give it, let's see, how about just RAS Lab Certification. There we go. And I'll go ahead and add. That'll pop up in just a second. There we go. And then I'm going to assign the users and groups. That's done. And I'm going to set up single sign-on. So let's do the single sign-on. And we're choosing SAML here, of course. And then let's just kind of work our way through. So right here, you'll see the Federation URL. Let's go ahead and copy that. Usually we can just copy and paste this in. I'll go back to that screen that I left up inside RAS and do that. Paste it, click next, and yeah, that didn't work. Okay, sometimes that happens. I think we're still kind of figuring that out. It's not a big deal if it does. It'll time out here. What I'll need to do, though, is go back over to Azure and download the federated metadata XML. Let me download that, and then I can just import it in. And this will work. I'm not sure what's going on with that copy paste. Like I said, I think that's still something that's being massaged a little bit. So let me choose here the upload from the file, and then let me browse over and find where I downloaded that file, right? Bouncing back and forth between RDP windows and virtual windows and all that. It's always fun. Okay, there it is. That's where you put it. So let me put there, click open, and then I'll click next and see that worked. So here we are. And I've got my log on and log out URLs right there. So click finish, click apply. Okay. And then I'll go into the properties, and then let's click on that SP. This is the Azure load balancer address that I'm going to put in here. The reason it's the Azure load balancer address is that's the one that was already configured. So we'll just use that because that's what people are doing. So let me go ahead and put that IP in there. And then it fills out a string of URLs for me. I'm going to need each of those, and I can copy them each in turn. So I'll copy the first one, and then the SAML configuration here, and I'll paste the identity provider, identity entity ID in here that I got from the console in RAS. That's there. Okay, and then I'll go back over to my environment in RAS, and I'll get the reply URL, and I'll go ahead and paste that there. Right, and the next would be the logon URL, which I'll get, and I'll paste it here. The relay state URL, by the way, actually isn't necessary, but we usually just paste the sign on in there as well. So you can just do that twice if you'd like. And then for the logout URL, I will put that in the logout URL. Imagine that, right? I love it when things match up. Okay, so that part's done. And I'll click save, and then while that's going on, we'll see that now the URLs match the RAS settings. Okay, so next I want to go into the user attributes and claims and pick a claim name. I mean, you could select for the type of login you want. I think most people would just prefer to use the email address, so that's what we'll do. If you look at the knowledge base article that we have here, actually what I want to copy is the user principal name, not the user mail name. I'm not sure why, but the developers do, and it's in the KB article. So I'll go back over here to the RAS console, go to attributes and custom, and then for mail, I'll take out that little email in the custom attribute, and I'm going to plug in that user principal name, and then go ahead and click OK. And then we always click apply, right? Okay, within that, let's go back to my local Active Directory, the non-Azure Active Directory, and I need to create some users. Remember, it's a remote desktop server. It's joined to the domain. Every user, even if it's coming from a foreign directory, I guess, like this is, it has to be unique for this to really work all the way through. Right? If I just had a single dummy user that was logging in all over the place, then every single user would be logging into the remote desktop server with the same user, and that would be a mess, right? Get the same profile and everything. One user to one account, even though I'm passing it through. So I'll just create a test user. I don't have to worry about the password here so much. I can create just a random password that never expires, because remember, we're actually going to be injecting a smart card, a virtual smart card here for the login. So that'll be my test user. I'd have to do this for every user that I have. And then the way I associate it, though, is I go into the attributes and add the email. And I'm going to add my Azure AD email here, right? Not anything to do with this domain at all, but my Azure AD email in there. That'll create the hook that ties this in together. Okay, one last little thing to clean up here. Those of you that were eagle-eyed might have noticed that I skipped the very first step when I set up the SAML on Azure, and that was the add group and add the assignment. What I need to do here actually is take my Azure AD users, and I'm going to use admin for one, and then I'll grab my VDI desktop. Even though this is remote desktop, the users are in that group. And what I'm doing is I'm granting these Azure user accounts permission to use the SAML app. So don't forget that step, right? So I'm doing that here, and I'm clicking, and you can see that now I've added both those to the group, or both those groups to the permissions. And if I look in this one group and look at the members, you'll see the email address I used matches this. It is a member group. So it works all the way through, and it does the handoff and everything else. And it should work, right? So let's find out. Moment of truth. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll reinitiate the login to the web page here. And notice it gives me not a RAS logon, but ultimately I'm going to get the SAML logon, right, that we've been seeing. So that should be kind of familiar to the users in that regard. Go ahead and type the password and log in. And again, this is the password for that Azure AD email account. Nothing to do with anything we've created in your local, quote, local AD or in RAS. So I'll go ahead and sign in, and there's my app. I've just published a desktop off the terminal server is all we did. I could use the Parallels client integrated here, but I'm actually gonna, let's just launch this in HTML5 only, because that's always kind of cool. I always kind of like this interface. And when you go full screen, you really can't even tell that you're running at a tab in the browser, right? I see the Parallels logo, and that tells me success. So hey, we did it. Woohoo! All right, and yeah, you can see I can move around and use this just like a regular desktop. We're successful. Logged in, like I said, woohoo. So let's break out of this and we'll look back at the RAS console, and I'm going to show you who actually logged in, farm, already session host. And then we're going to go to sessions and look at that. You can see that it actually is that test user. It has nothing to do with that. So you might actually want to name this something a little bit more useful. Test user. I did it just so we can see. So very easy to set up, huh? Super simple, not complex at all. If only. It's just the nature of SAML. So to be honest, the first time we recorded this, we got an error, and I had to go back to the magic of video and connect, or fix it. But this is what we got. We logged in. I want to show you kind of what happens so you can get an idea about how to, things that can go wrong here. So let's go back in time. So we logged in, we did this, and then we kind of went to the single sign-on piece. We got this far to the desktop, and then when we launched the desktop, right, through HTML5, denied. Well, it's denied. And you got to think, okay, is it certificates? Is it something I did in group policy? No, this was super simple. We forgot to add that NLA agent user to the remote desktop users group. Don't forget the basics. It's the basics right there. That was what happened. So now if I go back and do it, I don't have to log out and back on. This is taking part inside the local Active Directory. Okay, so very easy to kind of miss a step. It's just the nature of SAML. We've got it all documented very closely. There's knowledge base articles for both Okta and Azure that take you pretty far into those identity providers, how to do this. So those are there. We've also got some other knowledge base articles as well. Other identity providers will work. So it's not just limited to those two. Those are just the two that we have documentation on currently. So a couple of quick tips I've seen with SAML is don't forget that it requires HTML5 as your authentication, right? I can't use the client directly. I have to use the HTML5 interface for the login because SAML is a web-based application. Now, I can use the client and take full advantage of that, but I just have to use the HTML5 integrated client. We saw that earlier. Remember, when I logged in, we did the right click and there was the option to use the client or the HTML5 only, but the interface that the user is presented with is the HTML5 interface, and it's tied to themes. So you actually could have a SAML theme and a non-SAML theme if you wanted to. And the client does have to be version 17.1 or later. The other one I see, which is very related to this, is sometimes people will see that Parallels client-based SSO. That has nothing to do with SAML, right? They see kind of this interface, single sign-on. SAML talks about single sign-on, same thing. Well, first of all, you shouldn't be using the client. Remember, SAML is HTML5 only. It's a web application. But this is just the client piece. If you install single sign-on using the Parallels client directly, it just uses the local Active Directory, whatever the client is joined to, it will pass those credentials into RAS. That's what that is for. It has nothing whatsoever to do with SAML. So just don't get confused there. Okay, and then the last little tidbit is, you notice we're doing this with RDSH. That's what's currently supported. According to the documentation, VDI with SAML and RAS is limited. I'm not sure exactly what limited is, what's in the documentation. I do know that we will be adding in VDI support in the not too distant future. But other than that, that's it for SAML. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the logs, the troubleshooting techniques that we go through, as well as some of the tools that are available to us as well within RAS. So I want to start with kind of an introduction to the logging system within RAS, and then I'm going to show you some examples of how we use the logs to troubleshoot and resolve some issues. I want to talk about resolving some compatibility issues, specifically using a tool called Remote App, which actually is from Microsoft. It's a shell. I'll talk about shells in a minute. And then we'll look at the auditing and revert settings, a little bit of information in server tools on those categories and how that works. And we'll also do a little demo of some of this as well. But to start, let's just take a look at logging, right? I think most of you guys are probably all familiar with this, but you can look at the logging settings under Farm and then go down to the settings item under there and then go to global logging. From here, it lists kind of the standard logs that are available, and you can select a single log or multiple logs, and then we perform an action on top of it. So select the logs you want. My 2PA, click configure logging on them. And I can choose the level of logging that I want. Now, standard is on by default, but you can add extended and verbose logging. Some of the logs I'm going to show you, I'm going to list kind of what all the logs are. You can see what they kind of tie to, are only going to exist if you've got extended logging on. That's just the only way to work. Verbose logging, that gets pretty aggressive. At that point, you're probably looking at like engineering type data that would be more useful for the development team than anything. Extended and verbose in particular have a performance impact on your servers, right? They're aggressively logging. It's gonna take up some cycles. That's just the nature of logging. One of the cool things though is you actually can set a time to how long you can run that verbose or extended logging on. Standard logging is just on by default. It's on 24/7, 365. But extended or verbose, you can say, okay, it's been happening sometime within this certain time period. Let's turn that on. That also, because you see the clear button up there, right? Clearing logs, you can start fresh. These logs can get kind of long, and trying to dig through and read all this very dry data can be a little tedious and difficult to figure out. So if you're kind of in a troubleshooting situation that you at least know somewhat duplicatable, or at least you know it'll happen before too long, you probably could back up your logs, clear them, and then turn on extended or verbose logging for a period of time, let it happen again, and then you can go and retrieve them. You can retrieve them here. It kind of puts it up in a nice, neat zip file for you and lets you save them where you want. But that's kind of the high level there. If we look at the log specifically, the main one really is the controller log that's associated with the publishing agent. You can see the publishing agent, just in case anybody doesn't remember, is really the central piece. It's the controller, the connection broker, if you will. It handles a lot of the main activity that goes on. Authenticates with Active Directory, second level authentication is there, a lot of notification of devices and updates. It'll distribute the settings and information out to the remote agents, management, the RDP session information, the app information, orchestrate a lot of these different pieces and parts. It's kind of the core piece. So it's usually a good place to start when you're looking at the logs. Again, these are the logs that are generally, or that are associated with the publishing agent. You might, again, not see all of these on your system if you're kind of following along, unless you turn on extended logging. But the controller log is really the first place I usually go, unless it's obvious that maybe I should go somewhere else. But the controller log really is going to have a lot of that information in it that you want for troubleshooting. The installer logs, there's really two types. There's the installation and then the setup logs. The installation, this is really, did it run, right? These are used also, by the way, when we're pushing agents to other servers. We usually would push the RAS installer. It's going to run it locally over there. That information can be captured in the installation log files, but mostly it's going to tell us, did the installer run? Did it finish? Did it complete? As opposed to did it crash partway through? If you want to get down into the details of what happened, that's when you start looking at the setup log, right? That can be useful if you actually run through the setup itself, but also again, when you're pushing an agent out, it will run through an actual setup process kind of silently, so we don't have to see it, right? We just see the little status bar in the RAS console, but that information is being captured in the setup logs. For the RDSH agent logs, there's a lot of them here. Oh, and by the way, all these logs are stored in the program data directory under parallels and then RAS logs. So if you don't necessarily just retrieve all logs, if you just like to run to them directly very quick, usually that program data is at the root of the C drive, right? So it's C:\program data, but I guess it's a system variable, so it could be anywhere. Program data is usually a hidden folder, by the way, so you have to turn on hidden files and folders to see that. These are the ones that are associated with the terminal server agent. Again, TS agent is always there. Some of the others may or may not be. I'm not going to read through all the logs. You're going to have access to these slides. I just wanted to list them here so you would be able to see them. I don't think this information is in the admin guide. Next up would be the server logs, for the gateway, the VDI agent, enrollment agent, right? We have a new enrollment agent server, or enrollment server rather. These are the ones that are typically, or that are associated with. Don't forget too, there's client-side logging as well. The easiest way to get that from a Windows client is you just go to the Parallels client directly and turn on tools and options, and then you can view log, right? You also can enable extended logging in the client as well, which will do the extended logging piece, right? They get a little bit more information there. So don't forget there's client logs. They also have logging on other devices as well. This is where you would go find it on the Mac client, right? You go into the Parallels client, preferences, general tab, and then logging. You can view log, clear log, enable extended logging, and so forth. We do have logs on some other clients as well, and this kind of lists some of the logs that are associated with those. Again, I'm not planning on reading all of these. I just want them to be here so that when you have access to the slides, if you're having trouble sleeping at night, you can look through here and memorize all of these, right? I'm sure a question like this would be on the test. Boy, I sure hope not. I haven't seen the test yet, so I don't know. I wouldn't think it would be, though. Other logs, the PC agent, guest agent logs, these are logs that can be associated with them, like I said, if you have extended logging. Okay, that's enough for these eye charts. Let's look at some real-world examples. I'm going to show you a couple of different logging examples where we kind of had to dig through the logs to figure out what was going on. So the first issue is we had a client connectivity failure, right? The end user was actually connecting through a tenant broker. They would log in successfully. They would see the applications that were published, but then when they launched an application, it would fail. And they get kind of this warning or this message, right? The connection was ended because of a network error. Okay. You're like, well, my network's up. I can, got everything all the way through. What's going on here? Right? That could be anything. What do you mean a network error? Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the logs and see if we can get a little bit better information about what's going on. So if we look at the controller log, we kind of pulled it up. And fortunately, we didn't have to parse through a whole lot of data here. And if we read down through the controller log, I can see that, I was just testing it with the admin. It hadn't been rolled out in production yet. So admin at vCloud was logging on. It was successful. And then, hey, look at that. Look at this piece, right? Wants to launch application number 2. Remember, all the applications programmatically with it. That's how we kind of keep track of it. And it went to the server, and 3389 was the port, is unavailable. That's interesting. Okay. It's having trouble making an RDP connection to the server is kind of how I would read this. And that would be, remember where we make the RDP connection to the server? Let's keep in mind where that is. Right, we're coming in and out of the load balancer off port 80 or 443, right? And that means we're going into the secure client gateway off port 80 or 443. And 3389 would exist only between the gateway and the remote desktop server, I guess, or the VDI instance if you're doing that, or even a remote PC. This was a terminal server, so RDSH. So it's something between the gateway and the terminal server where that port is failing. And we can add in the factor that, remember, this is a tenant broker, so it's kind of new, and you're thinking, okay, is this something going on with the tenant broker that's causing a problem? And you kind of step back and you look at the architecture of a tenant broker. Well, let's get back to just because added more icons in here and more pieces and parts doesn't mean that the fundamentals change. I'm still making an RDP connection from port 3389 on a gateway to my remote resource, the remote desktop server, VDI, PC, or whatever. So I'm still making that connection. So that's the piece that's failing. And what happened was he'd forgotten to open up the port on the firewall on that tenant, right? You got to have 3389 open on that internal firewall. This should be an internal firewall, not a public-facing firewall, by the way, just in case you're wondering. The public-facing firewalls should be in front of the tenant broker gateways, not here. So this is just an internal firewall. So you need to have 3389 open. He forgot to open it. He could have used a different port too and just made sure that he specified in the gateway and the terminal server and the firewall. All that would have to link up if he used like 3390 or something like that. But the default, of course, is 3389. So that kind of helped us figure out what was going on with that, right? Okay, it was something with the RDP port, and then you got to think about where that goes. All right, let's take another one. This one actually happened personally. The Parallels client was working fine if I just use it directly, but when I was using the HTML5 interface, it would randomly fail. And I'd get this error. And this actually is the same error that we saw, by the way, when we did the SAML test, right? You made a typo in the HTML5 forwarding, and that would cause this problem. But I hadn't done that, right? It was still at the defaults. It's an internal lab. I wasn't going through anything too funky. But I was getting this where sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't. And the agents all reported okay in the console. So I took a little bit of a shortcut on this one. I actually grabbed that error at the bottom. 404 not found is not helpful, but RAS secure client gateway HTTP forwarding is disabled. And I plugged that into our online knowledge base. And what do you know? I came up with a knowledge article. So I go to the knowledge base article and see what's going on. And it says, oh, well, you got this component called node.exe, and it should be running in task manager and present on the server. Okay. So I went and took a look and looked at both my gateways. Gateway 1 was fine. But gateway 2, guess what? Node.exe wasn't running on my secondary gateway. All right, so that explains the randomness, right? It's running on one gateway, but not the other. The HALB is round robin, so sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And that node.exe only affects the HTML5 interface, which explains why the client would work, but HTML5 wouldn't. So to do a quick fix, I simply just I ran the RAS installer, it popped up, it gave me the option to do repair. And by the way, you don't have to hunt around to find that RAS installer. We copy it to a target, right? This was gateway 2. I had pushed it to, the gateway 2. And so it put the RAS installer on the local, on that secondary gateway, and it ran it from there. So it wasn't having to push all that data across the network. And so I just went into C program files, x86, parallels, application server on my target system, and there's the installer. Run that, run a repair, and it fixed the issue. Okay, so that worked, but what the heck happened, right? Why did that fail? What was going on? So maybe if I went into the logs, I could get a little bit more information about what kind of was happening there. So let's go to the logs, right? If we got the HTML5 interface randomly fail, well, maybe it's the gateway, so a good place to start would be the gateway log. So I look in the gateway log, I start kind of perusing through that, and I find this section here, failed to create the process, node.exe, and then I look through there and it's got the JS file, didn't work, cannot find the file specified. Effectively, it's telling me that node.exe isn't on the server and that's why it failed. Well, okay, I already knew that. Right, so the gateway is telling me what I already knew. So next step, I go over, and maybe it was something to do with the installation process. So I take a look at that the RAS MSI.log, through that, and that also really didn't have a whole lot of information because the installer ran and completed successfully. It didn't crash. That's really what that's looking at. And I know the gateway is up because, like I said, it was reporting up in the in the dashboard, and also I was able to make connections through the RAS client. It was just this one piece node.exe. So let's dig a little bit deeper, and I went to the setup CA log. Remember, this is the log that actually tells me what goes on during the setup process, and I start looking there, and I see something about node.exe and access is denied. So something was prevented from going, right? And that's telling me, so I've got something kind of wonky on that server that was interfering with the setup process, and it could be interfering with something else. Typically, when we see something like that, right, it's a permissions issue on the target server. Remember, the gateways don't necessarily have to be a member. Perhaps the account that you use, because it prompts you to type in, didn't have all the permissions you thought it did, or they got changed or something. Another one might be that antivirus is interfering with the install. If you've got really aggressive antivirus, you might need to create some exclusions. The exclusions are listed in our best practices document. In my case, actually, it was just a little bug that we've identified. Sometimes it kind of fails, but it was kind of giving me a big head scratcher. I submitted that over to the development team to fix it. But most likely, if you see something like that, like I said, it would come back to permissions or antivirus, or as I said, in this case, if you turn out, you know, you get to that knowledge base article and you see that node.exe is running, as we saw earlier, you can get that same error because you made a typo in the web redirection page, right, under farm and gateways and then the web tab. Okay. So that's a couple of examples of how you might dig through the logs and an introduction to themselves. Another common one, well, it's not too common, but something that can happen is an application, you'll publish an application and the app will launch, but it just won't display correctly, right? It just doesn't look right. Other times the app will fail to launch, it starts to launch and it's just one particular app, right? Your other apps launch. Maybe you launch like a test app and that launches perfect from the server, but it's just this one application I can't get to launch. Or the other one that I've seen sometimes happen is you publish just an app, you launch the app and it breaks out of the app and suddenly you're looking at the full desktop, which is not what you're going for. You just kind of wanted to do the app. What often can cause this is a shell issue. All right, and what's a shell? Just in case you don't know, well, you know, an app has to kind of run inside of something, right? Saying, well, it's running in Windows. Yeah, I know, but the display piece, it has to run inside of something. The default shell that we all know and love is, right, the Windows shell. It's the Explorer shell. Get the full desktop, apps run in that. It's their native habitat. However, when we're doing remote applications and publishing applications, you need to replace that Windows shell with something else. You got to have a different shell because we don't want them to have the full desktop. And Parallels can take advantage of two different shells. Our native shell is called memshell. So if you don't do anything and just publish applications, you're using memshell. That's ours. You also might have heard of Remote App. Remote App, of course, Microsoft uses for a bunch of different things, including products. But Remote App also is a shell. It's a Microsoft application-only shell. It's the shell that Microsoft uses to put their applications in when you use just the basic native tool. Well, Parallels can take advantage of these, right? And it's a big advantage because sometimes an app will work with one and not the other. The vast majority of applications out there will work with either one. It really makes no difference and it works and just goes fine. But some applications prefer Parallels memshell and other applications prefer Microsoft's Remote App. So, and I'll show you where the setting is when we kind of do a demo. I'll show you a quick picture and then do a quick demo on that as well. And so it's kind of more of an art almost than a science about which one you should use, right? Because I said the little failures up there I was talking about at the top, I've seen happen both ways. And I have also seen this. I had a couple of customers get really lucky. They were having an application fail with Parallels memshell, so they turned on Remote App, and then Remote App fixed that application, but then they had another application failed. So one was compatible with memshell and one was compatible with Remote App. Well, this actually can be set per server. So the solution here was simply he had to break those two applications onto two different remote desktop servers. Doesn't change your Parallels licensing, by the way. Remember, everything's included. and he would set one server to use remote app and one to use memshell, and that would fix it. Like I said, that third bullet I kind of skipped over there. Remote app only works with Windows clients. That's one thing to kind of keep in mind. It's a Windows construct, and that's a limitation of that. So remote app, if you have Windows clients and something works with remote app, it'll work. But otherwise, if you're using a non-Windows app, you're going to have to use memshell. It's the only way, right? So if you're using HTML5 only, not the HTML5 integrated with a client, but HTML5 only, you're using memshell. If you're running off a Mac, Chromebook, iOS, Android, anything like that, Linux, you're using memshell. If you're running off of a Windows client, you might be able to use either one, depending on the setting that you set. So where's the setting? By the way, if the apps still don't launch correctly, it's just the app is just not going to let itself be stuffed into a shell. And then kind of looking at the full desktop or VDI or something like that. There's a few other tricks that you can kind of fight with in there, like some JavaScript apps have some issues with, I think there's a setting about icons or something under advanced settings. There's a knowledge base article on that if you just go type Java sets, Java apps. But, and support is really talented at getting other apps to work. But this is a quick one that you can try very, very fast. Just change that setting, log off, log back on, and see what happens. So it's just a really quick one that you can do instead of kind of having to go outside to deal with it. But support is pretty talented, like I said, at getting some other application compatibility issues out. So to look where to set that, you just go to Farm, RD Session Hosts, select an RD Session Host and go to Properties. Again, there's that Group Defaults, Inherit Default Settings. You can set this server by server, or you can set them on all of them. And then there's a checkbox under Agent Settings tab. Right, so go to that Agent Settings tab that says use remote app if available. It's off by default. And again, the if available is because if it's a non-Windows client, it won't be able to use, it will default and fail back to memshell. So even if you turn it on and you're connecting from a Mac, it won't just shut it down or go into the ether. It'll launch it using memshell, which may or may not be working depending on how things go. That's kind of what's happening there, just in case. The other thing, I'll show you this too when I do a quick demo of this, is there's a overlay icon you may have noticed, right? So the memshell overlay icon is the standard Parallels icon, which you can change in themes if you like, but it's a little Parallels double hot dog logo down there. Remote app has their own icon, which is put in place, and you can see it's this kind of arrows pointing at each other off center a little bit. That's the Microsoft Remote App icon. So if you walk into somebody's environment and you look at their app that they've launched with the Parallels client, just looking at the icon, if it's got that remote app icon, you know they've turned remote app on for some reason or other. And again, obviously this is only on Windows clients that this works. Okay, with all that, why don't we jump over to a server side, and let's do an actual demo and take a look at some of this a little closer. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the interface and the tools that we have in action here. So I'm going to go ahead and log into the Parallels console. And here we are. So let's deal with the remote app first, the remote app settings. So if you go to Farm and then RD Session Hosts, and then I've got a few different RD Session hosts here. Let's just pick on these two. I'm going to take the second one. I'm going to run Property. Agent Settings. I'm going to have this one not set to inherit the defaults. That way we can modify it independently of another one. And then right here is the checkbox, Use Remote App if available. Go ahead and click that. And now this server will be using Remote App. And if we look at number one, my first server up here, Agent Settings, it has Remote App off. So it's just going to use memshell exclusively. So let's go publish a couple of applications. We can look at the difference. So I'll go to Publishing, I'll go to Add, Application, RD Session Host. I'll choose Installed Applications. Next, and for individual servers, I'm going to choose number one. This is the one without Remote App. Quick inventory list, and Oh, let's grab calculator, right? So I'll go next, next, and finish. Then we'll go back and I'm going to publish calculator again, only this time I'll use the other server. So next, already session host, installed applications, next. And this time we'll pick the remote app server, next. And I go down to calculator, next, and next, finish. And then for this one, right, it's easy to get confused. Let me make sure this is the correct one. So from publish from, that one's going to number 2, which is the remote app. Under the application tab, I'll give it a name, remote app calculator. Now we'll kind of be able to tell, and then we always click apply. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and log in like an end user would. I'll just go into the web interface, and I'll log in. And you can two apps, the remote app calculator and the calculator. So if I just double click on the regular calculator, and there we go, calculator. You can see, and it's got the Parallels little logo on it. And now I'll go to remote app calculator. And we can see the difference. Now it's actually taking a little bit to log in again, right? Because it's having to create a session on the other server. Since I've got remote app and non-remote app, it's forcing me to 2 different servers. It can't keep the session open on the same server. So now I have the other one open. So minimize. You have calculator, and you can see the remote app logo, right? It's got that little Microsoft logo down there, and then here's the Parallels logo here. That's really all it is. And from a functional standpoint, it looks kind of the same to me, right? What's the difference? Well, in an app like Calculator, in most apps, nothing. But if your app isn't displaying right or anything like that, that remote app setting can be very, very useful. Okay, so let's go back in and actually look at some of the auditing and logging functions. So for those, I'm going to go back under Farm, and then I'll go down to Settings, and let's deal with global logging first. Right, and this is exactly what we saw. I can select multiple items here if I want, and then to configure logging, standard, extended, remote, verbose, and I can set the time here, right? Nothing too crazy here, and then I can always retrieve them. And again, that puts it in this nice little zip file for me that I can stick wherever I want. Okay, a couple other settings that might be kind of useful that we can look at. One is back under auditing. You actually have the ability to audit all these settings and processes, right? Here. So as changes are made to any of these things that affect these particular processes, they're going to get audited or logged. And I can add more up here if I want with a little blue plus, right? I can add another process and put it in here if I'd like. So auditing by default is disabled. So you have to come here and turn it on. I enabled it just so we can kind of see something, and then I can click view and view audit. There's not going to be too much in here, but you can see, you know, playing with a few things kind of going on. And it'll also show you, you know, if you really look at it, who did. Of course, I log on mostly as the administrator. It's probably a good best practice to not just do that, have everybody use their own individual accounts if you're going to do auditing. Then you can see who changed what. But I can also see users logging in as well. So that's the auditing function. Beyond that, one other setting while I'm here that people kind of don't think about necessarily or realize was added is under client settings. So I'm under Farm Settings, Client Settings. I can show a password expiration reminder, right? So when users log in, they get that, hey, your password's expiring, you might want to change it. Because remember, if I'm working out of a system like this, just inside the web interface, even with it without the console, how am I going to change my password, right? How do we even know it does? This will be a reminder that this little user icon up here, I can click on that. There's a change password. So that's how a user actually can change passwords. You can do that as well. One of the little tip here that I don't know if too many people look at is this little settings. I don't come across this very often, but the settings are kind of held in little cookies. So as long as you allow cookies on the local workstation, it'll remember these. But you can turn this on or off. The big one, and I haven't seen this in a while because we've made so many improvements to the HTML client, but every so often there'll be a wonky application where the keyboard just doesn't work right. I've seen this where it's like got a, it was a big EMR app that it had a hard-coded field, and it just wasn't recognizing the numbers. It would only take numerical values, nothing else. They could kind of click in it and use the up and down arrow to toggle the numbers, but they couldn't actually type the number in there. We switched it to PC keyboard and it lit up and it worked. The default's universal keyboard, which is better. Again, the HTML5 client has improved so much that you probably, I haven't had to do this in a long time, like years. But just so you know, that's there if you need to do it, and there's some other settings as well. Don't forget to configure as we go through this. Is under notifications. I can come in here and click on the blue plus, and then I can add sorts of notifications. This will notify an administrator, specifically under the email. If you've configured the email server functionality within administration, you don't integrate with your mail server and then put in the email address of administrators. They can get notifications about what happens. You also can write little scripts that also will tell you what's going on there. Okay, so let's move off this one. These were just simple little things, but here's a feature that I'm not sure too many people are aware of. If I go down to the administration icon and then the settings audit, I can see the changes that were made, and I actually have the ability to revert some of them. So what do I mean by that? I can go up here to publishing, and I can delete, let's delete the remote app calculator. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to delete the regular calculator, right? Clean up a little bit, and then I'm going to click apply, and I'm thinking to myself, oops, I didn't mean to delete the second calculator. And obviously a single app isn't a big deal, but if you've got larger settings, this could be a pain. And you're like, oh, now I got to publish it again and do all that stuff. Well, I could just go to the administration tab, or excuse me, the administration icon category here. I can go to the settings audit, and then when I refresh, I will see the delete, right, of calculator. And this is calculator, not the remote app calculator, so it lets me know that that happened. These other ones are essentially me clicking apply. So I could click on this, and then I could go up under tasks up here in the top right, view the entry. That's what I would like to do. And then from here, I can see the actual changes that were made, you know, if I want to get into that level, but I also could just click revert and revert. Yep, I want to revert the changes, and then click apply. And then now if I go back under publishing, a calculator was restored, right? So very, very cool. And then again, that was under administration and settings audit. Okay. A couple other little we've added that may help you a little bit is under farm. And then if I click on site, you know, here's the dashboard that we all know and love that we've done such a nice job on, right? You can see, but I can click on a server up here, any one of them, and then click on tasks, and under tools, we've added all these Windows management tools for the server. I can RDP right to my server to deal with it from here instead of, oh, I need to go check that out. Let me launch an RDP window. And then what's that address again? I can just go, okay, I need to go look at the server and log on. So you go to tools, remote desktop, and do that. I can pull up the computer management, the services, look at the event viewer, PowerShell, ping the host, you know, netstat. I can even reboot and shut down from here. So those are some very nice, handy shortcuts that we've integrated in the environment for server management. And the last one I want to show you that can be of use is, don't forget about this little information icon down here. Support uses this a lot. And it provides similar information to what's in the dashboard, but it does give us a little bit more, right? I can see these servers and I can see their status, of course, of the agent, CPU, memory, disk read and write, all that I've already got, but it kind of puts it up in one place. But if I scroll down and look at a bit closer to it, I can see that the services started at this time and date, and that was also the last time that the operating system booted. So I can see how long it's up, and that if there's any unhandled exceptions or anything like that kind of going on. And I can do that for all the components across my entire farm. And then if I move to some of them, like the gateways, I can get some more information about it, like the current client connections and SSL connections and things like that that are going on the gateway. Hey, why isn't this gateway being used, but the others are being pounded? You could take a look at all sorts of information that's in here. So all this is very, very useful. I can even get down and see the sessions on the RD session host. Some of this, of course, you can find in other screens, but other pieces, it kind of puts it up in a nice spot right here where you can kind of take a look at it. More than earned another break at this point, so let's go ahead and take that. I'm going to put the timer up for about 15 minutes. Probably about another 45, 50 minutes when we're back. It won't go quite the full hour, I don't think. So you go ahead and put that timer up, and hey, have a good break, everybody. Okay, welcome back. Hope everybody had a good break. We're going to get into the last section here. We're going to talk about some additional features and functionality in version 17.1, update 1. These are pretty cool features, actually, a lot of interesting things. They just weren't quite big enough to warrant their own section long enough in terms of time it takes to introduce them. So we're going to add them all right here. So what we're going to take a look at is actually one of the very cool features is Azure VDI and RDSH autoscaling. We've added that capability into Azure. We'll do a quick demo on that. Same thing with Google Authenticator. I want to show you and introduce you to that functionality, and then we'll do, like I said, a demo as well. And then two other features that I think are very underutilized. I don't know if too many people are kind of snuck them in. Administrative folders, and then I want to talk about some of the advanced publishing features and functionality that you can use, and also how to delegate permissions. And then finally, we're going to very quickly go over just a couple of new features in version 17.1 that I just want to introduce them to you. Okay, so let's start with Microsoft Azure VDI RDSH provisioning, or auto-scaling, if you will. We've had this capabilities in our on-prem hypervisors, Hyper-V, Scale, etc. We've had that for a while, and what we've done is extended this functionality to Microsoft Azure version 17.1. So we have the ability to scale and manage workloads on demand now directly in Azure. So we can kind of scale up your VDI environment, scale it down, and the same thing with the RDSH workloads. So you can auto-provision and auto-scale these. Again, it's a very similar mechanism to what we're doing with our on-prem capabilities, but it does have a few Azure-specific features and functionalities in them. Okay, so let's take a look at this in action. This is a RAS environment, obviously, that's in my lab, and I want to show you how to initiate the connection with Azure. So just like you would normally do, adding an on-prem hypervisor, I go to Farm, VDI. You can see I've already got a couple of hypervisors in here already that are on-prem, vCenter, as well as scale computing. So you can still mix and match. We don't tie you down to one. If you kind of migrate environment, end up in a hybrid kind of situation, you can certainly do that. And then just like normal, I would go up here and click on the little blue plus in the top right. And what's different is here. Instead of just having the virtualization for on-prem hypervisors, which we support, obviously very many of them, then there's cloud computing. It's a new option. When I go to next, it takes me to the information page to continue on with this process. The type is Microsoft Azure, and it's grayed out. Why do we do it like that? Well, we left it as cloud computing because obviously we're going to add more cloud providers as time goes by. Probably the next one we'll be adding will be AWS. I don't have a time frame on when that would happen right now, but Azure is currently supported. Okay, so this is what it looks like as you initiate it. What I want to do is switch over to a different environment where I've already got the Azure hypervisor configured for us. Okay, so this environment already has the integration with the Azure hypervisor already completed. Everything we're doing, by the way, is in this knowledge base article that you guys can follow along with. But in this farm, I've got a tenant, and I've joined it to the hypervisor up here using Azure. Let's go ahead and go into the properties of this so we can review what was done. And you can see that I've given it a name. It has the authentication URL and the management URL with it. And then two very important pieces, the tenant ID and the subscription ID. The subscription ID, subscription to Azure, and integrate that if you'd like to. Okay, and then we move on over to the credentials tab. And for the credentials, we're using the application ID and the application key. And that, if you don't know what that is, there's some Azure documentation, or we have it in our own documentation. We'll describe you about where to get that. But that's what allows us to integrate in and actually see the virtual machines run, and then start doing the cloning and templating process. So once this is done, I can actually see all the virtual machines running in the environment. I've got just a few running in our little lab, but I do have two Windows 10 images here, 8 and 9, and they're being controlled by a template. They've already been deployed. So I'll go ahead and click OK, and we'll go over to templates and look at the template settings here. Right, you can see that it's ready, it's been deployed, and it's finished. So it's already finished deploying them, and it's be able to be used, of course, and published. But let's go ahead and take a look inside it. So I'll go up to tasks and then properties. And then here, you know, you delete an unused virtual machine, the max guest, available buffer, and I can also give it a name, which I did to increment it. And then on the advanced settings, I can deploy about the resource group. And then this is very cool, right? I can look at the VM size. I chose standard A2, but you can pick actually the type of Azure virtual machine that you want to deploy to, including machines that use GPUs or eGPUs, right? So they're all available to us to deploy on. And then of course the hard disks as well, right? If I want to choose solid state or just HDD, both of those are available. And then for preparation, we use RAS prep still or sysprep. They do the same thing. RAS prep's a little bit quicker because it doesn't require as many reboots. That's really the main difference between those two. And once this is all set, I can just click OK. And then the template now, the virtual machines, they're ready to be published. And to do that, let me move back over to our other environment real quick. So to publish them, it's just like we always would do. There's nothing really that changed here. I go to publishing, and then a little blue plus down here and add. And let's just do a desktop since we're talking about VDI. I would go next, the virtual desktop, next. And then I give it a name, and then just like we've always done, a specific template, and then that would tie it into the RAS templates. The other thing you can do, though, also on Azure and our other hypervisors as well, on-prem that we support, I can do a remote desktop server. So I could publish an application or a desktop off of those, and that would allow us to auto-scale these. The slick way to do this is just a little bit different. I would go next. I could just pick one or all servers in a site, but that doesn't really get me to the cool auto-scaling features I want to show you. The way to do that is to create a group. So I would go to groups, pick a group, and I've already created this group, and I just called it cleverly auto-scaling so we could show you here. And it's the group that ties that template to the application or the desktop that I'm publishing for remote desktop servers. So let me back out of this because I already have one created, and I'll just go up to farm, and then RD session hosts. And then inside the groups, this is where I do that. So you can see that I've got the auto scaling group created. And if I go to if I just go into the properties of this group, and here's where I would add the template, right? I would go and check on the RD session host based on a template, like this, and it would show me the list of templates that I have available. And then as it deploys more virtual machines, it would show me actually what members are listed down here. And then the real magic is occurring under the template settings, where here is where I can set the thresholds, right? Once it starts reaching a certain workload threshold, deploy another virtual machine, so I can scale up. And then I can drain and unassign servers from the group when it reaches below a certain percentage. This works in conjunction with that delete unused VMs after a certain period of time, so I can scale down, which is important in a cloud environment, right? When I'm paying rent on virtual machines, it's not a sunk cost. So let's switch gears here. One of the most anticipated features in Remote Application Server was the addition of some integration with Google Authenticator. We actually added this back in version 17.0, but it's so cool, right? This is a two-factor authentication service that's really easy to use. It's super simple. I'll show you that in the demo. And of course, it's free. I really like free. Okay, so let's hop on over to a quick demo. This is really super simple to set up and use, and I'll show you that. So I've got a workstation right here, and I've got the Parallels client on one side, and then I've got an Android phone image up on the other, so I can show you the whole process. Just to show you things are working, I go ahead and log in normally, and there's my applications that I'm entitled to, right, that have been published. Click around all that. So let me go ahead and log off, and then we'll switch over to the RAS Administrator console. And I'll go up to connection and click on multi-factor authentication and then the provider, and you can see we've added Google Authenticator to the list, so it's there along with all the others. Always click apply. Okay, that was hard. Okay, so let's go back over to the client side, and now when I log in, right, it's going to come up and it pops me up with the little barcode that I need to scan. So I'll just go over to my phone. I've already got the Authenticator app installed on it. I'll launch that, and then we'll Go ahead and scan that code in. Scan barcode, there we go. Take a picture of it. That's it, right? And then I just click OK. I've done this for the first time. It'll always remember now that this phone is attached to this account, or the Google Authenticator account is attached to this. I'll type in that one-time password, and I'm in. And then there's my applications, right? And everything that I've got. I'll launch, oh, I don't know, WordPad, right? That one's always good. And WordPad will pop up here in a second. So that is really it. I mean, that's how super simple it is. Since we're here, let me go ahead and close this off and turn it off if you'd like, right? Let me get out of WordPad and I'll log off my client again. If you want to disable that, you can just switch back over to the administrator console. Yeah, that's because I closed out of the WordPad. And connection, multi-factor authentication, back to none, apply. That's it. Okay, go back to my desktop again real quick. And yeah, here we go. Okay, so it works. Yeah, right? No multi-factor authentication. The reason I did that is let's go over and I want to show you how it works kind of on the Android phone here. So let me log off here. And then I've also got the Parallels client on the Android phone. So I'll just log out. Yep, there it is. And I'll make a connection. And you can see the phone. There we go. Phone actually is working as well on Android. This is the Android client, by the way, of course. So let's go ahead and turn on multi-factor authentication. So back to the RAS admin console, active connection, multi-factor authentication, Google Authenticator. Click apply. Get out of this, back to my phone. I'll launch the client from here. Now it's prompting me for my one-time password again, right? So I'll go back into Authenticator, open it up, and what's it, 018223. See if I can remember that. Back to the client. It's easier when it's on two screens. 018223. Okay, there we go. There's my apps. Okay, so the basics are just really, really super simple as you saw, but I want to show you a couple other quick things on the administrator's side that you can do here, since this is the advanced training after all, right? If I go up to connection and then multi-factor authentication, I go down to Google Authenticator, just like we're doing. There's this settings button over here. Let's explore that a little bit. So if I click on settings, I can do a few things here. First of all, look at that. I can rename the type of authenticator I want from Google Authenticator. Why would I do that? The new feature is listed as Google Authenticator, but it actually works with any OTP provider out there. So if you're just using Microsoft's, we've had support for Microsoft Azure in the Radius setting for a while now, but you could use Microsoft's just OTP or anybody else, and then just change the name here from Google Authenticator to Microsoft OTP or whatever you're using, right? That's open like that, and it'll work. It keeps you from getting confused. You also can set an enrollment period so that it only works during this period of time. And then if you have a user that gets kind of messes something up or changes like that, you can reset them. And they can, they'll have to go through the little scan the barcode process again. And there's also ways to get in here and do some import users as well. So these are some things that you can dig into a little bit on it. The other thing I wanted to show you is that this interface is version 17.1 update 1. So what it added is this user or group exclude list. Right? We've always had the ability to exclude, most people would do it off the client IP exclude list, but other ones exclude options as well. You know, you're at work, I don't challenge you for two-factor authentication. You're at home or Starbucks or something, and I do. But now I can also do it by group. So I can add a group in here. This group does not get challenged. And so, you know, some people are working on something more sensitive and they need two-factor. Other people perhaps aren't. It's just, you know, in the office work, whatever. You can exclude it by group also. Okay, and with that, we've wrapped up Google Authenticator. Okay, now I want to show you about a very cool feature that was introduced, I believe it was in version 17. It's a stealth feature, and I don't think it was very well documented or even advertised. It just kind of showed up in the interface, but it is really cool. It's been something I've been wanting for a long time. And it's under the publishing category, and it's the ability to actually create administrative folders, right? So let's say that your environment is growing, it's been very successful implementation, you're bringing more people on all the time, right? You're publishing more and more apps for different groups, and this list is not looking like mine in a little lab, but it's starting to get very long. And you got another problem too, you've been organizing it, right? And so when you log in, it's very well organized so far, but it's all in folders. And a lot of the end users are wanting to actually just have them presented up here in the front. Now, I mean, they could come here and star, applications that they use quite frequently, and then access them right here, kind of in a little favorites thing. But they really would like to let me go ahead and clear that before I forget about it. But they really would like to just log in and see them right here, right? Without having to go into any of the folders or anything like that. But yet that kind of breaks your organizational thing, because you're probably doing filtering at the folder level, right? I mean, I'm not applying any filters here, but I could be, right? You're filtering at the folder level for all the applications that are underneath it, instead of having to go, app by app by app. So what we can do actually is create administrative folders. So if I want to create a couple of different groups in here, I could create, first of all, I can just right click and duplicate what I've already got. And in this one, I can just, I'll just rename this to, I don't know, sales apps. And then I'll just leave Microsoft Office. I'll call this, admin apps. Admins need a PowerPoint too, right? But for the admin apps, maybe I also want to create a special folder in here. And you can actually nest folders in here and call it domain apps. Or yeah, we'll just call it domain apps. That'll work, right? I can use for administrative purposes and finish, and then I've got a couple of applications that an admin might want to use, such as I'd like to start publishing the remote application server console, and maybe they need to get into Active Directory users and computers. And then I'll go over here, and I've already got it set for folder tab for use for administrative purposes. And then up here at the admin level, under filtering, this is going to be allowed only for, let's say, domain admins. It's the only people that need really to get into Active Directory users and computers, right? So domain admins, so that takes care of that. And this other one, well, let's rename this. I'll call this productivity apps. And then I also want to drag the mission critical, let's call this, there we go. We'll call this mission critical sales apps, right? Calculator, WordPad, and Paint, they need that. So I'll drag this under there and nest that. And I'll leave that in there so that they feel very, sales are very important that they got their own folder. But for this folder, I'm going to use it for administrative purposes, and I'll go and click apply. So now when I go back to my browser here, and this would work also through the client, if I refresh, see, get rid of that folder. So the folder up here is productivity apps. It's gone. I've actually got a folder here called productivity that has nothing in it. Let me get rid of that because that's confusing things. And apply. All right. And then I'll refresh again. That gets rid of get rid of that. I could reorder these a little bit. But now you can see that I've got my Office apps right up here in the top row where I want. And if I log, this person actually is a sales rep, and that's why they see the sales apps also. Okay, if I wanted to nest that one, I could come in here under productivity apps and mission critical sales apps, and I could make this folder for administrative purposes too, and then apply. I clicked apply, right, didn't I? Thought I did. Yeah, I clicked apply. And then I just refresh, and then that goes away. And now they're all up here. So it's a way to kind of manage and manipulate. And then obviously if I log in as, break into this, I'll log in as an administrator for this one. Hopefully I didn't fat finger the password, right? Looks like it's good. I see the same set of things, except I also have my admin apps down here, which includes this. And obviously I did some duplication because I'm in a hurry doing this. But that's what that administrator purposes folder is. It's a way where I can still apply filtering at the folder level without having to present it to the end users. Before, the only way to organize it was also to put all the apps in folders and users, and you may have, you know, like a massive app at the top for certain people, and then a ton of apps behind it, and everything was in the folder. So that wasn't so good. So that's an extremely nice feature that you can do. You also can see where you can kind of do some shortcuts in here. As I right-clicked and I did duplicate, you know, if it's mostly duplicates, then I could do that and then clean up. And you also notice a lot of people don't take advantage of that. I can do that drag and drop. Remember, that's how I got the Active Directory users and computers in here. And this is another new feature that is kind of a little bit hidden. If this tree gets a little bit big, this is a pane, a window pane that I actually can resize. It's one of the few in the administrator console that I can do, but this was added. So I actually can resize that window as well. The other one, this is a cool troubleshooting tool that I'm not sure everybody takes advantage of, but if I was to click on the application and then go to the application tab, it has this verify targets. And it comes back and it tells me, okay, this is running on one server, which I know and it's okay, as opposed to, oh, I forgot to install it on server 2 or server 3. But I can do that at the folder level simply by right-clicking on a folder and going to verify targets. And now it's going to come back and it's going to show me everything in there. And you can see that, hey, look at that. I don't have a couple of these tools installed on these other servers. That's going to create some problems for me. I need to adjust and do that. The other thing that's very cool also is it gets kind of confusing who does what. We have an effective access button down here. I can right click. I can put in a user here if I'd like. If I'm filtering client device, the operating system or the IP address, any of those other filters that we can apply, I can go ahead and click view and it'll show me essentially what this person is seeing, right? It's show only allowed public resources. That'll kind of hide it. You can see things that they can't see plus things they can because it's grayed out, right? So I'm actually, the first option is it's showing me that, oh, admin apps is not available, right? Maywest is not a domain admin. I can hide it simply by saying show only public resources. And now I can say, oh, this is what she sees. Yeah, there's nothing in there that'll get her into trouble. And yet these two are critical or something like that. So I can do the effective access audit. The one other thing too in here, if I was to right click, it's a shortcut to the settings audit. Or I can come here and go to that settings audit, and this is where I do a revert. So if I'd done something that I didn't want to do, I could highlight that item, and like I didn't want to get rid of the productivity folder, then I can come back here and just revert it, right? And then there it's back. I could have done this as we looked at before by going down to the administration tab and then the settings audit and doing it that way. But places that you can revert, and it's not everywhere in the console, but places that you can, you often can right click and just go to settings audit and find it that way. So that also is a very powerful little shortcut that you guys can use. There's actually one other really cool feature and shortcut that I wanted to show you that I don't think a lot of people take advantage of either. This is for a more seamless experience. If I was to right click on this, as we've been doing, you notice there's also a site defaults setting here. In the site default setting, it takes over the last few tabs in the application properties if I was to go into an application directly. But the display settings, the license settings, and then the shortcut settings. Right. The shortcut settings, now this piece here only works with the Parallels client directly. It doesn't work with HTML5 interface. It also doesn't work with the browser integrated HTML5. You have to use the client directly, but it can give your users a more seamless experience. I could just click this box here, create shortcut in the target folder. Here's the default folder for the start menu, but you can obviously change that as you want. I also can put it in the auto start folder as well, so that the application will launch when they log in the morning. All right, or I can do the shortcut on the desktop. But effectively what that does is, again, you have to be running the Parallels client and have it configured. It can't just be sitting there like like it would be just unconfigured in the HTML5 client. But once I've done that, it goes ahead and creates the folder here. If I scroll down, there it is, remote application desktops and applications, or remote desktop and applications. And here's all the applications right here in the start button. So that gives a very seamless experience with that. If I want to modify that directly, it's like, well, I don't want to put everything in their start button or everything in the folder. That one is an app by app setting. I can come down here and just, let's see, under domain, you don't need the Active Directory Administrator Center in your folder or whatever. Shortcuts and say this one does not inherit the default settings, and then it does whatever here. Or if there's just one or two I want to put in the start menu. So you can get kind of granular with that. It's just that site defaults, obviously, you can also access it right here. We'll put them all in there, and then here you can exclude the few that you don't want in there, or if you want to go the other way, I really don't want most of them in there, but there's a couple we'll put in. You could do it that way also. While I'm here, the display tab also is kind of an interesting folder. Excuse me, setting. If I uncheck the inherit defaults, we can see it. It uses the same nomenclature as the other ones. If you've got applications that require specific color depth or resolution, you can do that here. It's usually best to just kind of let the application adapt to whatever the client is doing. But this setting right here can be very useful. Wait until all universal printers are redirected before showing the application. It actually can be a little bit of a delay. And, so it's used for printers, that's what it says, but it also can be a bit of a delay when you check that, because I think of it this way. Suppose you're mapping drives to group policy, okay? And an application depends on, I don't know, the M drive to be there when it launches. What can sometimes happen is the application will launch, then group policy will run, and then it'll complete, then the gets mapped, right? So the application launches faster than group policy can complete. And so the application launches, it completes, it looks to the M drive, there's no M drive, and then it fails or throws up errors or something like that. You're like, well, that stinks. How do I resolve that? Introduce a little bit of a delay. Okay, let's let the application take a little bit longer before it opens, but when it does, the M drive or whatever else it's depending on will be there. Right, so that's good. Also, don't forget that the client has the ability to do single sign-on. Right, if I go into tools and options, and you can script all this too. The client can be scripted, by the way. If I go to single sign-on, I can turn it on and reboot. That way, when the user logs in, they're already logged into Parallels, and you can also set the app to start automatically. So then when they log in, they've either got shortcuts on their desktop, they've got shortcuts here inside the start menu, and they can just go to their applications and launch. It's pretty seamless at that point, right? That's about as seamless as you're going to get to an end user in a remote application world. And I keep thinking of cool things. There's one other little topic I want to show you, actually two others real quick. If I go back into the administrator console, I go down into policies. You can do this on the client directly, but it's always better to centrally control things in policies. I'll just go ahead and add a policy. By the way, this is another little feature that snuck in and I don't know was widely publicized, but if I change the object types about what a RAS policy will apply to, we've added computers. It used to just be kind of groups and users and the built-in security principles. We added computers. So now you can actually tie a policy to a workstation as well as just users and groups. But where I was going with this is under connection in the advanced settings. Here's some timeouts, right, that you can adjust, but to get that truly seamless experience, that's what made me think of it. You see that little RAS connection banner, the ribbon that flashes across the screen? And then ultimately, if the app takes a while, it's going to show the desktop, right? The logging into Windows desktop that you see. If you want to create a really seamless experience, you could hide both of those from the end user simply by jacking this up, to something really high, like, I don't know, 360 seconds or something. What's that, 6 minutes? 300 is 5 minutes. Don't show that 5 minutes. If the app hasn't launched in 5 minutes, you got something else going on. And you could do that with a desktop too. But you combine this with the shortcuts on the desktop and the single sign-on, it's going to feel pretty dang close to just a local app as opposed to a remote app. And the one other one up here that kind of goes with that, this was new and was advertised quite a bit, but I would like to circle back to it, is this policy for session pre-launch. This only works with Windows clients, but it can be set one of two ways. The basic way is you, the administrator, are going to kind of set up a schedule. Okay, we're going to, such and such days of the week, it's going to do this and that and whatever. The better way, the cooler way, is really machine learning. And what is as users log in, and it usually takes about 2 weeks to kind of get fully smarted up, I guess, in doing things, right? Because it's machine learning, but it'll kind of figure out the user's habits, all of them across the entire site here. And it will start launching the applications in advance. That's why it kind of needs a Windows clients, because you got to have that tie-in, but it'll launch whatever they're doing on the server side, it'll launch them in advance. Okay, everybody comes in Monday morning and they're a little late because it's Monday, and they show up at 9 a.m. and they all hit the log on button at once, and we get a login storm, and that creates a lot of stress on our server. Okay, well, machine learning would be, okay, we're going to have a large number of people coming in and they're launching this application, and that application, usually right at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, and then about 8:30 or 8 the rest of the week. Let's get those running in advance, stagger that, and so the launches will happen before hours, right? So the applications are up and running, and so that avoids the logon storm, right? So you don't have to size your servers perhaps as beefy as you normally would. And the other benefit is for the end users. They log in at 9 and they launch their application. Well, they're connecting to a session that already exists. So they're just reconnecting. So it's very, very fast for the end users. So you add this, you add the hiding of the taskbar, the splash window, and the Windows desktop, perhaps if it's really slow, you put the shortcuts on the desktop. Now you're getting pretty seamless, especially with that single sign-on. Yeah, so I think we covered that enough. Let's move on. All right, so let me show you how delegate permissions works. So if I go into the RAS Administrator console, remember again, the goal is that I want like a power user or a senior person in a certain department to be able to manage sessions for their department, but not affect other people, right? Maybe the accounting department has a guy that's really good, who wants to help you out, and he wants to manage the sessions like stuck sessions, log off users, that kind of stuff in the accounting department, but you don't want them doing anything that would affect sales or IT or anybody else and kicking them off. This is accomplished through the use of themes. Okay, so I go down to Farm and I go into Themes, and I've got a bunch of different themes already allocated in here. So the way to do this is to first, let's limit the theme to just the departments. So I'm going to take the reverse theme here, and I have a group called Silent, and I'm going to limit it to just the Silent group. So I'll go ahead and click here and apply. So then if I go to Go to my browser, and I go to the reverse theme. Only somebody that's a member of the silent group can log in. So I'll log in with a user called Marilyn. And she is not a member of the silent group, so she tries to log into this theme and she can't do it. She can log into another theme perhaps, but not this one. Or I've got Greta here. I'll have her log in, and she is a member of that group and can log in. So I'll have her go log in. Yeah, let's save her password, and then I'll go ahead and have her launch an application so we can get a session open. While that's going, I'm actually going to have Marilyn log in a proper theme. So this is one that she does have access to. And I'll have her log in. And Marilyn likes to paint, so let's go ahead and get paint open for her. Okay, so Marilyn has paint open. I go back over to Greta's window, right? And she has Excel open here. So they're both on. And if I go back to the RAS console, farm RD session host, and go to sessions, reverse here, or refresh here, I can see that both Marilyn and Greta have a session open. All right, but they're in different departments, and I would like somebody to be able to manage that silent group. So if I go to Farm and Themes, what I can do is just right-click anywhere in the blank area and delegate permissions. So I'll go ahead and delegate permissions, and then I want to pick somebody that's in that silent group. So I can come up here and go plus. That'll add an account. I'm going to add Charlie to be the administrator, or at least the kind of the help desk person for this group. So I'm going to add him in. And now he shows up in this accounts over here, and I can determine what Charlie can and can't do. If I click anything up in this top section up here, you immediately say, oh, manage sessions. These are global permissions. Okay, they are going to mean that Charlie can now manage sessions across the entire site. I don't really want him to do that. I want to come down here to just reverse and have him manage sessions just on this one theme. So it's just theme should be just the silent department or the silent group. I'll go ahead and click OK. Yeah, and it's telling me that the new possessions, it has to log out and log in obviously before this permissions take effect for Charlie. So then I'll click OK and apply. Okay, now that that's done, let's see what we can actually do with this. So let me minimize this, and I'll go back to my web browser. I'll come in here, and you can see Marilyn's logged in here, and then here's Greta. I'm going to go to a new tab. Launch the web. If you haven't seen this before, it's a relatively new feature, but it has been around for a while. It's a web interface. If you do just the parallel server custom, instead of taking the defaults, next, if you do a custom, the very last item on that list is the web console. It doesn't get installed by default, so you need to do that. You can run the installer again on your current systems and do a change and add it if you want. But it just opens up a web console. You simply go to the server where it is and then type in this port 2443. It's in the documentation. And then it's a help desk tool. It's limited in terms of what it can do, but it's that by design because it's meant to be more for help desk personnel and not for an administrator per se. So I'll go ahead and have Charlie log into here. He should have permissions to it since we've added him. And you can see a couple of users, Greta and then Mae West. Mae West is in there because she hadn't logged off and back on when I made all those theme changes. Normally you wouldn't see her, but she's grayed out, so we actually can't do anything with her anyway, but ultimately she would disappear on him. But I can go up to actions for Greta, and I can disconnect, log off, I can send her messages, things like that. So very nice help desk type things. And if you have like different clients or tenants, you can even have somebody on site that kind of does this so they wouldn't have to bother you so much for basic stuff. All right, and with that, we're kind of concluding the portion of this. There's just a few other topics that I want to cover. Mostly just some new features that were introduced I want to expose you to, but we're not going to really get to them in depth because mostly they're worth mentioning just so that you're aware that they're there. The first one is our good partner Scale Computing, a hyper-converged infrastructure platform. We've had integration with them for quite some time with VDI, just doing straight VDI auto-scaling, right, templates and creation of desktops and so forth. We did in version 17.1 is we added remote desktop session host auto-scaling, so RESH or terminal server auto-scaling. So it kind of completes and rounds out that solution and that integration, which is really kind of exciting. Like I said, they're one of our very good partners. Another one is we've extended the drag and drop functionality between the the remote window and the workstation or the client system. We've supported the ability to drag from the client side to the server for quite some time. What we've done now is extended the ability to, or created the ability to do the reverse. So now you can drag not only from the client to the server, but also the server to the client. So you can go in both directions. And that, by the way, is supported on both the Windows and the Mac OS platforms. The other one is kind of an interesting one too, I guess. RAS reporting is the only piece of remote application server that requires SQL. It's the only one that requires an external database. We actually extended support finally to SQL Server 2017 and 2019. The thing is, this is really kind of a testing statement. 2017 and 2019 have worked for quite some time. I've been using that in my lab environment for a while now, and then support wouldn't have hung up the phone on you if you'd called them and had an issue with it or running those versions of SQL. But we actually finally formalized and completed the reporting. So now that support is fully added in that. One other one that's kind of interesting on the printing side is a feature called printer retention. If you go into the administrator console and go to universal printing, the category, you'll see a new selection option there called printer retention. What it does is it just makes the redirected printers become available faster, right? So instead of logging in and then, you would log in and your apps would launch, but then your redirected printers may not be available right away if you just were going in to print something real quick. It may take a few minutes to show up. That setting, it also can make the app launch faster. If you remember way back, we went into kind of the application properties under publishing and then the display tab where you had that little delay and that checkbox that said don't launch the app until the printers are available in case you had an app that was dependent on that. Even if you have that box checked, this can make it the application launch faster as well, right? So what we're doing is instead of deleting the printers when the user logs off, they're kept in the registry, but we're just kind of removing or recalling the permissions, and then when they log back on, we're reinstating the permissions. So it's more just like toggling a switch instead of having to make deletes and writes, so it does speed things up a little bit. By the way, there's a great document on our website. It's under our documentation for printing best practices. We have a regular best practices document, which has performance tuning and a whole bunch of other things that I cover generally in the training. But there's also a printing best practices on there that gets way down into some of the other settings that we recommend, fonts and caching printers and things like that. So that's certainly worth taking a look. Moving on, we've had a PowerShell interface for quite some time that we've been using. You can actually deploy an entire RAS farm with it, manage it, do settings and all of that programmatically. We're constantly enhancing and extending that, and we've added a bunch of new commandlets that are now available that it kind of enhances that functionality there. There's an online guide for that also under that resources area where you can go and find the rest of our documentation. But the other cool thing that we've done is we've opened up an API. So we've implemented the REST API, and you can now control them by writing another program or having some other utility integrate in with Parallel's remote application server through the API. So that's there as well. Again, both of those, the information about them is available on our website under that resources area. You go to parallels.com, you click on support, click on remote application server, and you all the way down to the bottom to the technical documentation and resources. That's where it is, or you can just go to this link right here, and that will provide you all the information that you need to get started and rolling with that. Okay, and with that, we're done. Quick little wrap up here and a few things. You know, there is going to be a follow-up email that's going to come out to everybody. It will have a link to this recording, so you will be able to listen to this and listen to me over and over again, right? I'm sure everybody wants to do that. It also has the slide deck that I use. That also will be available and in there. Okay. And also we'll have a link to a survey. And I do ask that you fill out the survey, please, and fill it out honestly. You know, a lot of places they're like, oh, anything less than a perfect is a failure. You're not going to get me into trouble. You're not going to hurt my feelings. But please fill out the survey and fill it out honestly, because we actually use that to kind of adjust our training. Something that you want to spend a little bit more time in, or we didn't cover that maybe we should add, or, you know, skip over that, whatever. Just please fill it out. When you do that, make sure that you talk about the advanced training and then also specify your geography. We do have different people that train around the world, and if you don't fill out the geography where you're from, then I won't know if you're talking about me or somebody else or what. So please do that. And then, of course, the other piece is, you know, there is the certification exam. So please go ahead and do that. And I had this slide up earlier, but just so we can see it again, if you log into the partner portal, you can get trained, get started, or get certified, I guess, under the Parallels Remote Application Server training link there. That provides a lot of the online documentation and training, or excuse me, the online training stuff that's available for our partners. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, there's a place where you can go ahead and take that exam, and you can get your little badge to be Parallels Technical Certified, and there'll be a new one for advanced training. Okay, and with that, we are done. And so thank you so much for attending. I'm going to hang around for a few minutes just so we can answer any questions that you might have. But other than that, we're there. And I'm also going to go back to the chat window and the Q&A section and see if there's any questions that I missed, and we'll go through that. But from a formal standpoint, we're done. So unless you just want to hang out and hear the questions, which is kind of always good, thank you again so much, and have a great day. Okay, I haven't seen the other questions in a few minutes, so I think that'll do it. I'm going to go ahead and end the WebEx. But thanks again, everybody, for showing up. I'm going to go ahead and end the WebEx. Have a great day. Thanks for attending.